vanilla.
Yeah. So when we do Cinder, when we do block, we go as a driver to Cinder. When we do file, we go as a driver to Manila. If we do object, we go as a driver to Swift. Although I'm not sure if it has drivers, but it will be a direct interface, I guess.
Yeah, we access a shell.
Yeah, it's a direct interface. But yeah, so I think our interest is on the lower half, kind of Cinder, Manila, Swift. These are all the parts of interest for us. So now what we did initially, and this is the first interface we had with OpenStack, was as I said, since Cinder includes drivers, so we wrote a driver for CoprHD. And so in this case, what happens is, although Cinder is supposed to have multiple drivers and multiple, storage platforms, if you use CoprHD, then essentially you can do away by having multiple drivers. You can have just one driver, and that one driver is a kind of virtual driver for all the actual drivers which are there in CoprHD. So that way, one benefit you get is you don't have to have too many drivers in Cinder. You just need one driver, which kind of acts as an interface for all of your arrays. So if you want EMC or IBM or HTS or any of these arrays, then actual drivers will be in CoprHD. And
so I have a question about this.
Yeah.
As I understand it, I'm not well versed. When you're doing Cinder, because there's no discovery, you have to set up like a file that tells you about the.
Correct.
So, do you do a file that kind of tells you what CoprHD is offering?
Yeah.
Okay, so
it's called a configuration file.
If I have would it be a valid use case for me as a bank, and I have 500 things and Clarions and whatever, and I discover all of that in CoprHD, is it that much simpler for me to now use CoprHD as my Cinder driver rather than having to make 500 of these files? Is that true?
What is the 500?
I don't know, the Cinder file, the configuration file that you have to do per array when you're setting up your Cinder.
You do one configuration file, and then there's one entry for each driver that you have. Right? You have a driver for a VMAX or something, you have one entry in there, right? Saying what your back-end array is.
Right, but is it per array?
Well, in the direct model, it is per array. See, I'll cover the config part later in the next slide, right? Where I'll go into a little bit of detail.
That's not really. The key thing is it's not really 500 places where you have to update it. It's a lot smaller than that, but it's not one either.
Right. I think that's kind of like a use case we want to study later on the parking.
As we go through this, we want to, there has to be some benefit. Okay, we tell somebody, don't use Cinder.
Right.
Okay, so what are the three things that would
three,
motivate
top
somebody to do that?
So
you're
that's what I'm trying to get.
Touch on it, but I think whatever. There's at least three things, but we should go through that and just validate that. Okay, we think that's actually a good enough reason or not. Whatever.
But there's a technical argument and there's a political argument.
Right.
You have to.
Well, we can focus on the technical.
Fair enough.
So one thing is, of course, you are getting rid of so many drivers and having just one driver.
No, but that's
no.
But in that case, you just shifted the problem.
You shifted
the driver problem from CoprHD.
True.
And
so that in and of itself is not a motivation.
When this came up, Jing can probably comment too, but that was a big point of problem with the Cinder community, right? Was you're putting another layer now in, and then your drivers are underneath that, so you're just abstracting it more. And why? Why not just write a Cinder driver?
Yeah. So this is just a phased approach. This is the very first thing that we did.
Yeah.
Because of course, it's not the ideal thing.
So I think we should spend some time in going over what was the POC. Then we can put some on,
True.
What are the compelling things that we are bringing onto the table in CoprHD compared to Cinder? Why do we believe Cinder does not have those features, and make sure we are completely aligned on maybe top 3 or top 5 as a starting point.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah. So anyway, this was just the beginning, right? This is the very first thing that we did, and it has some benefits, right? The benefits are kind of you are able to manage through the UI, a lot of the discovery and all that. You have all those vplex workflow kind of benefits in CoprHD, like yesterday Tom went through how we do orchestration and all that. Now, all that benefit you do get here, right? Because, for example, if you're using vplex with Vmax and Vnx as a backend, when you do create volume, create volume is just a request that comes from Cinder, right? Underlying, we do all that orchestration. We figure out where to put the volume, where to put the backend volume, how to export it to vplex, how to claim it on vplex, how to create a pseudo device export, and if, let's say, now the primary goes down, automatically the secondary comes up, you get high availability. So a lot of that underlying orchestration stuff with vplex, recover point and all that will work here. The OpenStack guy is kind of oblivious to all that, but through the driver layer, all that stuff will work.
So I think if I summarize, right, I think if you have the enterprise SAN storage in mind, and maybe replication, all these things, multi-patching, all that stuff, then, I mean, Cinder has some SAN capability, but it's pretty weak. It's very weak. So if you're in this kind of environment, I think with all the automation from the SAN and all these things, I think that could be an example where, hey, you get more sophisticated automation.
The vplex case is very interesting in that there's two layers of volume creation happening, where if you're just using vplex with Cinder, you would have to have created and allocated storage to vplex and created a pool in vplex before you could use Cinder, where CoprHD will do the whole thing on the fly, all the way from the backend and the symmetrics to presenting, to adding to the pool, to creating a new vplex device.
See, this is where the cultural difference comes in, right?
Yeah.
Cinder community thinks, hey, that's not my problem. I will hand off what needs to be done to the driver. Let's call that as a vplex driver. So calling that as a vplex driver. Let vplex figure out. So there are a couple of things it passes, right? So one is I need to create a volume with this type of a tenant credential information.
Yep.
And there is a configuration that says here is the type of vplex instance that this driver is managing or supposed to, carve out something behind it. And then there is an actual driver semantics behind the scenes on what it wants to do by connecting to the specific instance and creating it. So
I think that's actually fine, but you need a fairly sophisticated driver to go do that.
Cinder module doesn't understand that there is vplex and other array that it normally supports using different Cinder drivers behind.
No, but that's okay, right? That's fine.
That's fine.
Again, it's just...
It's not about driver inside driver, right? It's all about, this is where we need to be really careful. I'm not supporting either one of them, right? I'm very unbiased in terms of what I'm looking at. But, when we say you cannot do with vplex, we really need to have a very crisp answer on why we cannot do it, because I don't get that. I can still do that.
There is no vplex driver, by the way. There is no vplex.
No. Don't get me wrong.
I think
if I were to do the,
if I
were to take the stock Cinder implementation, write a vplex driver today, I cannot do that because here are the 5 different gaps in Cinder. Hence, I cannot do that. Then I'm perfectly fine with it. We can't just say, hey, I don't have vplex driver, hence I cannot manage in Cinder. That can't be the argument in the
right. No.
So I like your point, Reddy, and I think what you're imagining is a vplex appliance that has, maybe it's Viper or some other kind of capability within it that does that for you, creates the whole stack from the vplex, so that the vplex looks like, in the end, it just delivers a volume. But then the Cinder driver just says, I want a vplex volume.
Yeah, that's how it would
I
work.
disagree, because if I have, so does it mean that vplex has some magic knowledge about all arrays for which you have drivers, that is.
Well, in the appliance, it would have to, right? That would be built in.
Okay,
But it doesn't do
bring it
zoning
back.
and
We're
all the
not,
other
it's not, we're
connectivity.
not the VPlex product, we're trying to think what we should do better. The reality is, if you're trying to use, if you want OpenStack with enterprise transport, and you want to take advantage of the enterprise feature, a lot more automation that you get with CoprHD. That makes it much more practical to do that than if you just created either drivers that exist or created your own driver, because it would only cover, 10% of the surface area of all automation. I think any argument here just that, hey, if I have these sand environments with some the level of automation we could get that is in CoprHD today is far beyond what's in Cinder today, and therefore if you're going into this environment, someone would be highly motivated to use CoprHD.
So, yes, but they won't understand it that way. So, yes, that is the truth, and in this room we can understand that. But if I go to a Cinder room, they won't understand. They won't accept that.
One is let's understand technically where there's value and where there's not.
Okay.
And then a completely separate problem for how to market it to the community. Those are two completely different things.
Well, I think a question might be, why isn't it up in a different layer? Why is it in the driver layer?
Well, that's
why
a
can't it be
different
up?
question as to why this layer cake.
That's a question that might be asked.
Which I think you'll have to propose.
The different.
How to get rid of the layer cake, but
I think we are
regardless of
jumping
how it
to
is.
the future part, but today this is what we have. Right? We need to understand what we have today and what are the capabilities and what are its limitations before we go into what can be done, right?
Yeah. I mean, the truth is, if we have enterprise and Appland, if it has very advanced capabilities, it is difficult to take advantage of that in Cinder.
But it is possible though using extra specs with volume type. Yeah.
That's where you get challenged, right? So when I mentioned this one, it's like, hey, I can do that. Yes, you can do that, but I think the team has to be, okay, now, who creates those specs?
and then
who actually creates those
specs?
Look at the system admin.
If there's feature N that you want to enable after the fact.
Exactly.
Who goes in and modifies the config, stops Cinder, restarts Cinder.
It purely makes sense from a programmer viewpoint, right? So I can create, 100 different line items in the dictionary, as part of the specs. But the reality is when it comes to the deployment aspect and, an admin actually trying to make some sense out of it, that's where you see the challenges. This is where the Cinder community does not get it.
Exactly. The control of those knobs is given to people who would normally use those knobs.
Exactly.
And this,
But even still, I could define 100 specs and pass them in. Who actually interprets that spec and then does something different? It's like somebody has to write that code too. To actually, somebody passed in extra spec foo equals bar.
Yeah. Right. That's because you don't have state information.
Who is going to actually do something different?
Right.
Environment.
But that's because you don't have state information that's really maintained and managed by the driver to be able to execute the kind of information that.
Okay, so somebody then has to write a driver.
Yeah.
That does something.
Very driver that maintains don't persistently store. Not apply.
Not only that, but I think the other hindrance is each actor only knows about itself, but it doesn't know about the other pieces around it, which goes back to the complex SAN situation.
Right.
You could write a driver for this array, but now this driver for this array would need to be able to also have behind the scenes a driver into every possible switch, every possible other array that is going to do.
You need a collection of drivers for you to do any automation.
Right, that's why you need a controller.
Array driver, underlying driver, switch driver.
It falls apart.
Yeah.
It falls apart the moment you have anything beyond carving out a storage resource.
Correct.
On a storage backend. Because now you need a fiber channel network, you need a host side configuration, and you need to connect to the networking layers to be able to configure it correctly. All those stitching, end-to-end stitching, completely falls apart. Manila team is doing something in that space. They are trying to create, let's say if you are creating a share on the host, it needs to have the network connectivity to the back end. So they're doing a little bit of that with the Neutron and all that plumbing, but still it is far from getting that completely an integrated view of end-to-end path is completely connected and it is ready and functional. It takes a lot of magic behind the scenes.
So my argument was, when they say, I just pass it to the Cinder and all the complexity should be handled by the array.
No, in a way we are doing it, if the array happens to be something like CoprHD, which has a lot of intelligence. So we are actually registering ourselves as an array, but kind of a virtual array, right?
Right.
That virtual array is a piece of software which has a lot of intelligence.
Yeah, the best analogy is the Cinder driver from Nova, right? It's the same concept, effectively.
So what we have, they don't have, is that we can do orchestration of multi-device.
Yeah, exactly. I think that is the bottom line.
There's only single device, right?
Yeah. So the orchestration of multi-device, and that's what he said, complex and virtual.
Which is what goes back to my original question of the setup. Like, could you use, I'm asking, could you use CoprHD as a way to supercharge Cinder and basically say, now you can do things you couldn't do before because you weren't able, but now because you're just asking for gold storage to this virtual storage array, who cares what gold storage is? And yes, behind the scenes, CoprHD is doing all sorts of crazy stuff, right?
That's no different than what he has here,
So
but
right,
it is a higher level abstraction.
Yeah.
All you're saying is, I'm going to deal with gold storage, and it has some extra specs, and it is using the the CoprHD driver.
Right, but but behind the scenes, I have 500 arrays.
Yeah,
That's what.
And I don't have to deal with that. Yes.
Exactly, that's what we have. We have lots of arrays.
It would, okay.
And behind the scenes,
So it could be done.
yeah,
Good.
but as far as Cinder is concerned, there is only one drive.
One instance.
And that underlying array happens to be, a kind of a virtual array which has all these orchestration capabilities, and it does all that stuff behind the scene. So some of the benefits of CoprHD we do get. Yeah.
Well, it's more of an open question. I don't know the answer to this. I just want to ask. Is there a way to do like a distributed install of CoprHD? What I'm getting at is basically, when we look at things like either active-active under vplex or replication, is there a means in CoprHD to be able to manage the site, take over control basically of management from the other end of the data center, basically? Because what I'm getting at is, right now in Cinder, I can do replication, but there's no way for me to replicate that metadata and have it imported on both sides to have an active control plane, if you will, across sites. And I don't know if CoprHD can do that or not.
So CoprHD can manage multiple data centers.
Yeah, so for replication, put each site as a V array, and then we can provision across them, certainly.
And the control plane is distributed, so if you lose one site, you can still administer the replication.
Control plane is, well, it's 3 sites. It's not generally distributed across site, but that's a future, well, I would say DR is something that...
All right, there's an active passive mode DR that's in the planning stage for...
So again, I don't know if this is a differentiator, but I was kind of asking about the fact that, because I know Cinder today doesn't do a decent job of, sharing.
OpenStack in general doesn't have a multi-site. If you need, if you want your cloud to be able to DR somewhere else, there's nothing in OpenStack. All of OpenStack, forget storage, that would really enable that. There's no VMware SRM kind of thing where you file and then have to say, yeah, so storage don't have that. I think theoretically, when this multi-site control thing comes in, then CoprHD could deal with that, but you'd also have to solve it somehow in the rest of the OpenStack.
The compute stack also, yeah.
Because if you just bring the storage and you can't bring the VMs, then, but I think that theoretically could be a differentiator. There's some missing pieces.
I'm thinking both for replication, being able to do DR use cases, but then also if you have vplex behind CoprHD, then you potentially have an active-active data plane too.
Yeah.
We do vplex metro,
So I think the multi-site could be, again, there's some gaps.
Yes, we did.
Which actually need to be addressed before. But today it does do multi-site, but the failover thing is not quite.
The problem with this stuff, in my opinion, is I feel like the OpenStack community only goes down presentation of storage. They don't care where it came from. They don't care how it got there. They don't view that as their problem.
Well,
And what you guys are talking about is really talking about, oh, hey, but there's other people doing stuff.
Right.
It's really a management thing in my mind.
Well,
Because,
it's
hey, there's
actually
storage administrators down there. They had to do something before I got this stuff. But OpenStack people are saying,
Well, the thing is that, so philosophically, all implementations in OpenStack happen against open source reference implementations.
Right.
So effectively, when they're developing Cinder, their reference point is LVM. So
That-
if that capability
I don't know where
is
it came from.
LVM,
Right.
it won't be exposed to Cinder.
right, but I think this is why, again, one of the reasons, like CoprHD started almost, maybe a little bit before Cinder, but it was clear the focus of OpenStack was not all the way down to the bottom of storage.
That's
It was-
the benefit
it
in my
was
mind,
to the-
what you're actually
some piece, and there was an overlap, like
Hang on.
this was OpenStack, and this was, what we were doing with Viper, and yeah, there's some overlap, but neither one of these by itself was doing the whole thing. If you put both together, you can get top to bottom. I mean, that was, and you couldn't get anybody in OpenStack to worry about any time, because they focusing on the cloud, and it was a different thing, and it was one use case of a storage environment. They weren't trying to be a storage management, which is fine, right? I don't think, but I think this is where, again, we can enumerate, some of the things you need to do this. If you're interested in solving this problem, the entire problem, then feel there's a strong connection. But then, what does this look like? And
So I have this question. Are the operations in OpenStack extensible? For example, could we inject operations to do site failover into OpenStack so that they would become visible in the Keystone or Horizon UI? Could we inject?
not really, because this guy has its own persistence. Have to be geo-replicated. This guy has its own persistence, including some representation of the storage volumes and analysis.
You mean when you say site failover, you mean about the Cinder services or the?
No, I'm talking about the storage failover. Failover in an RP sense, or migration,
The problem is,
vplex, or
It doesn't have any.
there's no notion of it.
but if they had a way to inject extensible, if their services were extensible, theoretically maybe.
So,
But the
Python is expensive.
well,
No, but fundamentally, this is some MySQL database. There's nothing in any of the services that actually understands multiple sites. No distributed persistence mechanism to deal with multi-site. Doesn't mean OpenStack won't get there.
I mean, they're working on it.
I'm sure they'll work on it. But this isn't the sort of multi-site for this entire stack is not a problem.
so I'm not thinking it's built in. I'm thinking more like Sonar is not built into Eclipse, but I can plug it in and use it.
Well, it's not as simple as writing a plugin.
Yeah,
I mean, so if you want something like the active-active configuration and all that good stuff around it, you really need to do that in the Cinder service layer. So volume, API services need to be multi-site configuration, and then you can worry about the storage backend able to do something else.
This could help by giving ways that this backend persistence could be active-active.
Correct.
Yeah,
It gives you a primitive that builds an active-active distribution, but somebody still has to do work here, make these services.
It's not a big deal to add a persistence layer with Cassandra plugin, because right now they have, MySQL DB2, there is a plugin, right? And there is the Oracle plugin, Oracle RAC plugin. It's not a big deal to add a plugin. It's just a
Be a little careful.
trivial investment, but does not mean that you get the end-to-end thing. Just
even
taking
there-
the persistence layer.
But even there, we actually looked at, could we put a different backend using our geo-distributed storage? Problem is, it uses like multi-table joins and some other transactional facilities that just don't exist. So that would mean you couldn't just swap out
Yeah, it's not
SQL
yeah.
with its ACID transactional multi-join semantics and put Mongo or Cassandra or something primitives.
Yeah, but
You have to actually change the...
Right, I agree. The SQL layer in Cinder is not that sophisticated. It requires really lots of complicated joins and all that
But
stuff.
it does that.
That you can't get away with NoSQL, Cassandra type of a backend.
Okay.
So my point is that you can actually do it. It's not, in my view, that is not a crux of the problem. The crux of the problem is just adding the persistence layer that is HA type of a configuration does not mean anything unless you change the Cinder services to be HA, as well as all the constructs that Cinder provides to the creating the volumes and all that stuff need to be HA as well.
Yeah, HA is multi-site HA is a huge deal.
It's not.
I mean, it's not. I mean, we can help solving storage.
Yeah, but it's not like.
It's a big problem. But again, there's ways you could potentially, if you have the storage geo-replicated, you can write all kinds of fancy scripts and other things to try to simulate it, but it's a complicated problem.
So in nutshell, what we are saying is that from a CoprHD perspective, if we cannot tout its capabilities, where if you're saying that CoprHD would make the entire OpenStack much better, we can't go and tout capabilities like multi-site, where the entire stack is not multi-site.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. So this is
Exactly.
This is a theoretically possible, but not practical today. But the reality is, if somebody wants multi-site, they'll go with VMware stack or go with some other more capable stack.
Then you are.
By the way, you can still use CoprHD with that stack, right? So you're not locked into which site.
So that kind of brings to a point, and I'm sorry I'm taking it too high level maybe, is what is the goal of OpenStack?
Yeah.
Where are they going? Where are they targeting? And is their journey and CoprHD journey intersecting at places?
That is the question. Yeah. Because you're talking about a class of user that looks at storage as a bunch of JBOD controllers. And you need to have a significantly better story for them in order for them to really migrate to your way of thinking. Otherwise, it's going to be, really hard to sell.
Yeah, I think this, I mean, to answer Puneet's question on goal of OpenStack, I mean, there is some theme that emerges when you actually talk to these people, because there is nothing like, there is a vision they're trying to get, and it's a baby steps. That's all you get a clarity on. Every conference you go, it's a 6-month baby step that you get clarity, maybe 1 year, and a bunch of blueprints you can actually come to your own conclusion on where they're heading, right? I don't think as a community there is a specific direction that it is going in a certain way and they want to go in that way. There is no long-term path. At least I have not seen. You guys can correct me as you are very close to the community. But by talking to all these guys, what you see is they are essentially looking at, hey, OpenStack way of doing things will be, I have the compute, network, and storage frameworks. They will plug in a wide variety of backends. It is supposed to address the platform 3 workloads, right? That's basically the classic theme that emerges from these guys. So platform 3 workloads, why would I care about enterprise workloads? I can just put a bunch of, let's say scale IO stuff or, solid fire stuff. I don't need to worry about a whole lot of replication, all the advanced data services behind it. I expect them to be managed behind the scenes.
Cinder is doing replication. I know the replication need to leadership. Going that direction, I know it's kind of slow, definitely slower than what it wanted to be.
So,
and then multi-site, like the HA, that is also something that we're working on.
Rolling upgrades.
Rolling upgrade,
yeah. So things are evolving. I'm not saying they're not working, so don't get me wrong. What we're saying is there is a theme of what kind of workloads that OpenStack is trying to address. How does the storage focus will fit in? And is that theme is really looking at the enterprise storage arrays, all the advanced features, and are they looking at exactly? So that's where I'm going. Right?
I was going to say it depends on who you ask. So first of all, the 6-month roadmap and focusing on 6 months is very valid. But in the community, we've started this thing called Product Working recently. We have product managers from 80% of companies on board. So we have representation from Intel, Dell, HP, Red Hat, etc. And one of the worksheets that we're working on is actually doing a 3-release roadmap going forward.
Yeah, I know that's being addressed.
But more importantly, I was going to get to, the point I was going to make is, it depends on who you're asking, because I would say if you ask Intel, they are trying to drive some of the enterprise-type use cases. If you ask Red Hat, they're trying to drive NFV, which actually has a lot of similarities with enterprise as well, for CPU pinning and certain use cases. So depending on which vendor you talk to and what they think their path to monetization is with OpenStack, you're going to get a different sense.
Different directions, yeah. It's not like a coordinated way of, hey, we want to evolve OpenStack in this way, and let us all work together.
Just focus on what we can do with OpenStack. I mean, if we get into an open-ended discussion, it will go on for the whole day, right?
Exactly. Okay.
I'd like to do some real quick. I want to say how I think of this problem. As an operator of data centers, why do I see value in something like CoprHD? And that might be totally off the mark. But I can tell you what.
You're all guessing what you're saying.
What I want is OpenStack has not solved my storage problems. It's made them more complex. It has made my management problems bigger, not smaller. And so, if I'm only focusing on a piece of this pie, which multiple, different vendors are doing, then that's fine, but usually I'm getting left with the gap. And it means that I have different people that are trained to do different things. And so from my point of view, what I really want is to use a smaller amount of people that don't have to have as much deep expertise. I don't want to have each team having to have deep expertise for every problem, especially just basic management stuff. So for me, the point of CoprHD is really about attacking the stack of that and saying, no, I don't want to have some storage administrators that have deep knowledge down here and they have to be involved in every single thing. Oh, want to make more storage for Cinder? I got to go get these guys to go do something. It's slow and it's expensive. So from my point of view, it's really the value comes in at the point of I think, expanding the capability of the operators and taking into equation the whole problem. And all the things that I want to do going forward, I can't do with the current OpenStack having, 99 different, projects. I don't want that. That made it more difficult. To me, it's just storage. How you want to present yourself is relevant to me. Your object or your NAS or, you're some kind of, to me it's just storage. Right. And I think it's made it more complex by breaking all that stuff up. So,
out of curiosity, when you envision the layout, what's your ideal backend that you're going to use? Cinder or whatever?
So it's a mix of things. Okay. I mean, I don't know how different we are, from everyone else, but we've got legacy stuff. We've got stuff that'll live on arrays, that'll always live on arrays. We've got stuff that's scale out. We've got stuff that's object. We've got local disk stuff, like JBOD.
Yeah.
So I don't have we don't have a mix of things. We have a mix of things, and that's the problem. What we're looking for is unification. And saying,
irrespective of whether it is scale up or scale out.
It's just storage.
Right. So
irrespective of whether it is the block, file, or object, scale up or scale out, you need to be able to manage end to end.
So those are the pieces that can let you bring it all together. That's valuable to you.
And giving us insight into performance, across the board, giving us the ability to provision on whatever it is. Because for us it just changes. It's not like one array that's always that kind. I show up, I want another one, and it changes all the time for us. So that's, to me, the value is the ability to abstract that and empower the operator who's there. Because a lot of times the people that are running that stack, they don't have deep, storage expertise. That's not, what they do, and we don't want them to have to go get that every time we want to do something. At least that's what I...
Very good. And let me iterate, tell you a little story about this customer with Anil and team in India working very closely. Japan, right? I'll probably not say the customer's name, but I was there, I flew all the way down to meet them, and they wouldn't meet. Because why? They changed their direction and going pure OpenStack. Fine, that's good. I met the account team and then I came back. And very soon, I think maybe a month later, they were there. They were knocking at CoprHD store, right? And saying that can we make can we make an OpenStack this thing with CoprHD in there to manage my storage. They have a number of different storage devices. The enterprise, large enterprise, they have obviously heterogeneous storage there, and it took less than a month from when they decided on OpenStack to realize that they need something like CoprHD in there, right? So we are working very actively, and that's kind of what Anil will show some of the things. I mean, we are actually doing it in enterprise environment at this time. Whether it's optimal, it's the right way of doing. I mean, from a stack perspective, from what the customer wants to achieve in the long term, whether they will succeed, it's still, I think, a little open at this point. We're trying to manage an enterprise data center with lots of heterogeneous, storage, using OpenStack and CoprHD. On high reliability, they're Japanese. They want very high reliability, and they want and yet have this very complex setup in there.
So what I would say is about half of the value does come even if you use a driver. The ideal situation would be for us to put it exactly into the box, and that's something that we are trying. But even with this, and this is what we are offering to the Japanese customer, we do get, a significant value of CoprHD in terms of orchestration and all that, and the fact that there's only one driver which goes to Cinder. Okay?
So then if there's an array Shane has in his data center that's not supported by CoprHD now, you can still use Cinder, right? If he wants to use OpenStack, he can still use Cinder.
Yeah, and for third party, we do use Cinder as a southbound, and I'll cover that.
Yeah, I think that's
so what we are doing is, apart from exposing ourselves as a driver, we are also using Cinder's capability to talk to other arrays by allowing any array to be used by CoprHD, even if we don't have a driver. Anyway,
so your question is by using the driver underneath Cinder, is there a major capability?
So driver Cinder part.
If you were to look at top 2 or 3 items there, would you miss any one of them?
Let me cover the southbound part. Let me first finish the northbound, right? So just one more jump ahead, because we spent a lot of time on this slide.
I'm in the parking lot already.
I have lots of slides to cover. First I thought, how will I cover 3 hours? But it looks like I'm running out of time.
You got stuck in the first slide.
So a little bit of this, which will, be useful in the later part, is what are the difficulties? We have the driver, and so the advantage is that a single driver, right? But there are certain difficulties even in this model. The point is, there is a Cinder configuration file. So Ura, you're asking about this, right? There is a configuration file in which we have to say what are the different backends you have. So for example, you have fiber channel, you have iSCSI, you have SCALI, you have to configure a backend for each one of those, right? And then you have to configure volume type. So for instance, if you have different virtual pools, for every virtual pool you have to create a volume type in Cinder. So for instance, here I have volume types platinum, gold, and so on, and these I map to the specific virtual pools in Viper, right?
So this is manual then?
Yeah. So this
whenever you create a
little bit of manual configuration is required, and it's not automatic in the sense if you create a virtual pool, Cinder will not automatically know unless you go and make these few entries.
Yeah, so what we want,
we can easily,
this is a hack today.
Yeah, we can automate it.
What we want is I create a virtual pool, and then I can create a volume
directly
where the type is actually just that virtual.
Yeah, there should be just like an export Cinder configuration button.
No, not even that, because that's like, this is just 2 layers. You have my Cinder layer on top of it. It just needs to be 1 layer. And
And the other major problem in this is that because see, we have concept of project and virtual array. I mean, these are all the different constructs we have in order to, split our data center. Unfortunately, there is no way for Cinder to pass these values to the driver. So we end up hard coding them here, right? Configuration. So essentially what happens is one configuration can be used by only one project in one VRA. As I increase my number of tenants, number of projects, number of VRAs, these combinations keep multiplying. So I'll end up creating, hundreds of entries here, even though I have a single driver.
So it's one entry per VRA? Is that how
per project tenant VRA combination?
So you have a project.
If you have two
That's
tenants.
So a regular OpenStack user wouldn't care, would never do more than one, because they don't have a concept of the project VRA, like they don't care, right? To them,
But they have tenants, right? So if I have 5 tenants, each tenant has 5 projects, and I have 2 VRAs, it will be like 100 entries here, if I have to really use. So those are some of the issues with this manual configuration.
Give a slide on how we're going to fix it.
Okay,
yeah.
Quick question, Ansible script. You said before the CoprHD driver is not in this upstream Cinder. Have you tried and it was rejected, or is it not tried yet?
What's the history behind
Tried
it?
and rejected. Got it. Okay. Just wanted to know.
Yeah, we tried, but so it was not accepted. So currently it is only on GitHub.
Yeah, the Cinder community wants the driver to be one-to-one, right? One driver for one type of array, and since this is another abstraction.
By the way, I think that's actually correct, because the proper way to do the CoprHD integration is as a replacement for Cinder, not complicating Cinder to underlying controllers.
So there was a bunch of thrash a year or two ago about this, and then.
So really speaking, what we want is this CoprHD to be here, right, and not here, and not. So that part I'll cover in the.
Which can now happen under the umbrella thing.
Correct.
According to Randy.
So let me then jump topics to talk about how we use the southbound part, right? So again, this is there today, right? Just as we have northbound integration through the driver, we have southbound integration through Cinder, and this kind of touches with the afternoon topic we have about SDK, southbound SDK. So the history behind it was because we had so many drivers, but still there were a lot of arrays for which we didn't have drivers, and there was a need to expand the support matrix to say, because there is a limit to how many drivers we can write. For a lot of the arrays, we didn't have the information in terms of the programming, spec, etc. And even if we had the spec, it was just physically impossible to put so many engineers to write so many drivers. So we wanted a way to expand the support matrix, and by looking at various alternatives, we said, why not use Cinder, because Cinder has a lot of drivers already. Right? So although this is not the ideal approach, this was kind of a via step we took to say, hey, until we come up with our own southbound SDK, so that vendors can write drivers, which will be full function drivers, which do discovery and replication, all the features that we have in current drivers. So this was kind of a in-between step that we took to say, let's use Cinder as a provider of drivers. And again, the initial thought was, since Cinder drivers are all written in Python, and we have Python support in CoprHD, why can't we just take the driver and copy it into CoprHD? Let's say the admin has the access, can copy it into some directory, and then we start directly using it. The problem with that approach was because the drivers in turn, included some libraries, and those libraries included some other libraries. So, the dependency chain, and there was no fixed dependency chain, like EMC drivers uses something, Hitachi uses something, IBM uses something. So, if I really have to support all the drivers or all the vendors, I end up copying one by one all the Cinder libraries, and pretty much,
the whole Cinder.
Basically, we would have to ask the OpenStack Python library.
Yep.
All these drivers.
Yeah, exactly.
Set of libraries they're using. It fits into what we're doing because they have interface to logging, configuration, etc. So
and even that approach,
much simpler solution. I mean, instead of hacking, let's do this and see what happens.
Sure.
so instead we thought, let me directly use the Cinder API, right?
Right, but we just flipped the two-layer cake.
Correct.
Exactly.
But we still have a two-layer cake.
Yeah. So here the cake is opposite way. Copperhead is the requester, right?
Question of which layer you like, huh?
Yeah.
Copperhead's higher in this one.
Chocolate topping, right? So we have Copperhead.
Like a chocolate
We now emulate Nova, right? So we kind of emulate Nova, right? We make calls to Cinder, right? We register, first of all, we register with Keystone, and if you register with Keystone, we get the API endpoint of Cinder, and use the API endpoint to talk to Cinder. Cinder thinks the request coming from Nova, so if you say create volume, it will create a volume.
So outbound plugin.
Yeah. So now, with this, we are able to now work with all the different arrays for which we don't have native drive.
But this only makes sense, number one, if it's not an OpenStack environment.
Right.
Yeah, true.
Otherwise, you'd have Cinder on top
Yeah.
of it. It's like
Yeah.
And again, it's still like this two-layer cake, which is.
Again, it's
You
not
say
a...
that's not OpenStack, or it is?
So you never, why would you ever do this in OpenStack?
Right.
No, because then,
You would do that
because to get to northbound, you need Cinder on top of Copperhead.
No, you would do that in an environment where you want to take advantage of the Copperhead native drivers, okay? Then
No, in theory,
you have,
yes, but.
But
in
that's a reality.
practicality.
But in
no,
practicality,
ridiculous labor.
there are customers who want this solution even for
But that's the reality. Yeah.
So in theory you'll never, but in practically we are doing this as a customer.
What are you doing? You're nullifying the management functions of Cinder above and below by just having it be passed.
I know, I get it, but it's such a complicated,
It
it's like something's not gonna work. How do you,
Right.
the bucket, it's like operationally.
Why is it more complicated?
That's the reality of today's data center, right?
It's Horizon still sitting above, or you just.
No, we only, it's a private instance of Cinder and Keystone. We don't install anything else.
But I don't think you have to put Copperhead below.
There's no.
No.
Only Keystone and Cinder is all we.
This is not where we want to be.
Yeah,
That's what we're doing.
I think we probably should talk about that.
We are emulating Nova. So Copperhead acts like Nova, right? And Keystone gives you the endpoint. Cinder does the driver. So we are essentially using Cinder as a volume manager of all the drivers, right?
So a couple of things, right? This one should be used on an exception basis. So in my view, if there is a customer can't use top-to-down Copperhead as a Cinder replacement, makes sense, right? But the goal is, to me, I see this as a stopgap solution.
Yeah, it is a
Before we
stopgap.
actually move the right hand of the Cinder drivers back into the Copperhead and use that top-to-down stack as opposed to really the dual stack.
It is absolutely,
nightmare.
yeah.
The hope would be as people join and start working on it, then we move from Cinder basic functionality up to customized native drivers that can then expose those better.
It's a migration path as opposed to really state solution. That's
Right.
So ready to, good news is that we do have real life customers who will kind of work with us.
And I think what that says is the pain is.
It's like just put out okay and then start
They're
migrating.
willing to do wacky things to solve the pain.
Right.
Which is okay.
And we should use those examples
No, but yeah.
when talking to these companies and saying, hey, here's an example of your, what we're having to do with your storage, because people want to do both.
We gave them overview as to what the future is. So the point I was trying to make is, yes, there is craziness, there is controller, right, to solve what they want to do is realize this thing. But they also realize it and they're willing to work with us, to at least reduce one controller out of three controllers.
And by the way, in this, there are a bunch of limitations. For example, in this model, we cannot control port allocation, right? So for example, when you want to export a volume, right? And yesterday talked about how we do performance-based port selection. That's something that we can do with our native driver to say, based on how much there is a load on a port, use these ports or those ports, and kind of balance the load and things like that. These are the kind of things we
But
can't
you can still do that though, right? If you were to have a native driver, you can.
With a native driver we can do it. Through this mode we can't.
With this mode you cannot.
You don't have native drivers in this
But
mode?
won't it use the native driver though? I thought it used the native driver.
It used the Cinder driver.
But what about
So the
the
native is for the
your arrays?
different.
It's using the Cinder drivers for all the arrays, like
Everything.
3 par arrays.
Not everything.
No,
Using both, so for arrays where it's using the Cinder driver,
we cannot
won't
control
be able to
port allocation.
do port allocation.
Well understood.
For the other arrays that on the same instance are being used through their native driver,
Yeah.
they can. So it's just array specific because it's not available.
There is a volume WWN, which we use for a lot of our detection. For instance, if you create, there are these catalog services which like create a volume, export to vCenter, capture it, create a data store, format it. A lot of those catalog services or services for Windows, Linux, those things do not work because volume WWN.
Okay.
So, you can make them to work using, HTL mechanism and things like that. So, there are some limitations.
So does this still make sense, Anil, for platform 3 storage, southbound SDK, southbound Cinder?
Southbound SDK we need to do.
No, southbound SDK is fine, but southbound Cinder does it?
So once we have southbound SDK, we don't need southbound Cinder.
Even with platform 3?
Southbound SDK is our ultimate goal, right? Southbound Cinder is our via medium until we reach that goal.
It's a stopgap.
Yeah.
Well, yes, but it's not going to be just a switch, right? Because each array would need to have
it's a gradual
driver through the southbound SDK before we can say, okay, don't use Cinder anymore, use this other one.
I would never use Vplex or Vmax or VNX through this path. Okay? Or for wherever we have native drivers, why would we use this?
Exactly.
And
But people shouldn't think that as soon as we have the southbound SDK, we're no longer supporting Cinder because that's not going to be...
No. We do need to get 3 par and all these guys to use our SDK to write the drivers.
Exactly.
Exactly.
Are you going to talk about ingestion later?
No.
Because I think that's another limitation.
Yeah, that's a limit.
Ingestion meaning brownfield, and this is a question for the Cinder guys. Is there such a thing as taking a pre-existing volume and doing something with it after something that already was there, and then you come in as Cinder and you use that pre-existing volume and do something with it?
You can ingest in Cinder.
You can?
Manage, volume unmanage, yeah.
Right?
Didn't
know that.
Attached volume you can ingest without any...
I don't know about ingest without any issues, right? But there is the concept of managing a volume that wasn't previously managed by Cinder.
How, is it just a bunch of files or?
Unattached is easy.
Exactly, that's what I'm talking about.
Yeah.
What we're talking about is the attached volume.
Attached volumes, if you want to ingest the storage groups and all that.
No, because they wouldn't know that. It's fine, that's fine.
Suggestion of a brand new volume that's already been used, that concept available in Cinder?
Manage, you can bring it in.
Yeah.
So brand,
How?
you can bring it in.
Yeah, you can manage it, yeah.
Yeah, you just do the...
Okay, so it's not just a transfer, it's
You can do
also...
unmanaged and attached.
So is it the case where you say, go there and get me all of those devices, or is it the case where you like, no, I know about this device, and now I'm entering into the database somehow to say from now on, manage
See,
it?
there is no discovery, so what it means
That's why I'm
is that you need to know the device ID already.
You have to know more about
If it is
Okay,
array,
so that might be another
go to
thing.
the stuff.
Let's be clear, like, why does CoprHD have this ingestion? Because you have customers like Citibank with 60 petabytes of volumes that if they're going to do something, and I don't know how many, you have zillions of, you have arrays doing all kinds of things, some OpenStack, some not, and you want something to come help not just the new volumes you create from today on, but like, that OpenStack is not solving that problem. That's not the problem OpenStack is trying to solve. Nor should it shouldn't try to solve that problem. So maybe there's some volume managed, but that's probably for a different use case. That's
why I brought it up
come in
to
and
become
take
right.
over management of my 30 petabytes of existing storage, whatever it's doing. That's not a use case.
I don't think. So that would be, I think, a reason to install CoprHD instead of Cinder, right?
No, I mean, you know,
But again,
there is
that's
no...
not an OpenStack problem, right?
Okay.
Like, no one's taking the 10,000 volumes we already have and now, like, having those apps run through OpenStack and use the same stuff.
Okay.
I mean, that's not a use case.
It might be though, depends on how you're talking about that, like if you're talking to like operators, I mean, how many are purely OpenStack?
So that's for the multi-compute environment.
Very few, right, are purely OpenStack. So I think if you are talking to them, then I think that is an argument, which is, I bet you got storage that's not tied in OpenStack.
Right.
You want to manage that differently?
It's a compromise, it's not necessarily.
Something more being in the business of pushing
VMware,
people, having to push all their stuff under the OpenStack umbrella. I mean,
No, I think that's my point is that with right now, you know, is that or is that not an argument for it? I think it is an argument to me because not all my stuff is OpenStack.
Right, exactly.
Nor will it be.
Oh, okay.
And so if you're pitching me a tool that allows me to take advantage of my whole environment, then that's an advantage to me.
Sure.
That actually is a pro.
This is probably
It's just
not
not
an
an
open one that's probably
Right.
It's just not it's not
something we present to the OpenStack.
No, but to your point though, like when I usually qualify as do I want to talk about CoprHD or Cinder when I'm engaging a customer, that's one of the first questions I ask. Do you have multiple computer environments you're managing? And then B, how much experience do you have with like, standard Linux HA tools like cluster better because you can do HA with OpenStack components as well, but it requires managing Galera, it requires managing Pacemaker, CoreSync, etc. Whereas with Viper, it kind of automatically take care of for you if you will lose architecture.
Yeah, this is a really important one. Probably the top of the first question in the decision tree. If the answer to this is yes, we have multi-compute. It's like we were talking about now this whole new cloud native world. Completely different community, Mesos, Kubernetes, Docker. Like you go in there and talk OpenStack, and they're like, "What do you get out of here?" Kind of thing. So it's like, what?
Last year. So last year.
Whatever. I mean, it's like stuff moves so fast. The customers are like, "What the hell is going on?" So yeah, this is really important.
So this is going into a little bit of details how we do this outbound. Essentially, we are using the REST API, right? And so yesterday, Tom talked about the API service control service. So this is all, it's a kind of a driver, pseudo driver, sits in the control service. And it's a common driver for all the third-party arrays. And we still have native drivers for natively controlled arrays, and this pseudo driver talks to Cinder, and through Cinder it can talk to any of the third-party arrays. Now, just made a small list of possible projects or enhancements, even in the driver model, because as I said, when we do replacement, there are times when with the driver model also there are a lot of places where people will use CoprHD as a Cinder driver. So we would like to add features to this driver, for example, replication or quality of service and things of that sort. We would want to give one more.
No, what it says, let's make what we have better. We thought we were going to completely change the architecture, get rid of the layer cake.
Yeah, my contention is, even if we do that, there will be some customers who would still want to use the driver model. The one that we have, right?
I mean, as soon as there's something, you say this in the existing thing.
Okay.
First, how many of these things do you try to keep up to date? And it's an either or. It's like either we keep the current layer cake, or we try to do it.
So, yeah, exactly.
Drop it in place.
I totally agree, it does not make sense to continue the route of either being the southbound to Cinder as a driver and continue to enhance it for the sole purpose of enabling that. And it does not make sense to add any features on the right-hand side if it is, CoprHD is not for. It is purely a stopgap with the focus and intent of converting all the drivers in Cinder, specifically the ones that have the major traction, not all of them, to be CoprHD native.
We know, what that list is?
Yeah, exactly. We know the list. We have the list.
How many, there's 20 drivers or whatever, but it's
It gets out of proportion when you look at all the models,
no,
right?
do we know, back to the Linux OS thing yesterday, what 3 things could we do to cover 80%?
I mean, there's 40 plus Cinder drivers. I don't know which one's the most popular. I don't know.
So I'm
Customer trade. What are you using? But there isn't a
It's a standard usual culprit. There is nothing,
Yeah.
So I'm willing to bet, the drivers written for things like SAP or the lower end arrays or will be more popular than, say, a VMAX.
I would agree with you on that.
Yep.
Because if you use Cinder with VMAX, you just bought a very expensive JBoard.
Yeah. That's true. Totally true.
From our perspective, so with the drivers, if you look at the other side, right? So you look at Viper, which Cinder drivers are top priority for us?
Why do we care about it?
No, we do because we need to make websites safe.
No, tell me more about it.
No, because so developing this JBoard driver for Viper is not that complicated because there's not much functionality.
No, be careful. It's not that simple. So when you say developing a driver, there is a lot more that goes on behind the scenes to make sure it is certified and the darn thing works for a wide variety of use cases. And every 6 months when you crank out something in the Cinder, you need to make sure that...
He's not talking Cinder, he's talking about native drive.
You're talking about the native drive.
Native drive.
Okay. Not the Cinder one, okay.
No, native drive.
So for us, I think to CoprHD, I think drivers for the low-end array is actually not that big. It's not much complexity.
Let's be careful. Part of what Eddie said was this whole qualification thing. So you might be right that the actual amount of code that has to be written, especially because you can be very limited to discovery on it. A lot of these things somebody has to be tested with the gear. Who has access to the gear?
Yeah, that's where the complication.
I understand, but low-end gear is not so easily accessible. I don't need to buy $1 million VMAX for testing.
Right. Yeah, but you have to test by new release.
But then now you own the testing of it.
You need an interoperability.
Then you own it. You own the support. You own everything.
So incremental addition to what we already do is small.
And if we wanted to,
So
if we want,
how does qualifications go when it comes to trying to keep up with new arrays, new platforms, new clients, new ways?
Okay, perfect example. Scale I/O free and frictionless didn't work with CoprHD. Can't be used.
Yeah, exactly.
Otherwise, why would we end up there?
But that's not the...
That's exactly it. There's some other storage platform, changed its APIs around.
They don't even let you know.
CoprHD wasn't whatever, for whatever reason, and it broke.
It's not easy.
Multiply that by 50.
Right, yeah.
but those are the companies that should be easy to bring in.
But that problem is
Fine,
just even if you...
Well, you have to have, interoperability is the key. And
But be careful
you have to
though.
have engineers staffed up whose job is to maintain interoperability.
Yeah. I mean, just take all these emerging vendors, right? All the Pure, Nimble, all these guys. They have like 10 different SKUs. So which one are you going to test?
Right.
And then every 6 months, no, he's talking about...
No, I know, but I'm saying...
Every 6 months, you crank out few different models and then you rev up the firmware. Which firmware are you going to test?
Well, that's why the storage management is the the game.
I'm sure it's an NP hard problem that you're dealing with.
We have to offer something compelling to the storage vendors that they're incentivized to maintain interoperability with. That's the way it works.
None of us is saying that any of this is going to be trivial. All of them are going to require... No. All I was talking about, in terms of number of features and actual code written, it's much simpler, and I totally agree. But there's more to it. Fine. But the point is, we need a list, preferably ordered, of, okay, which one are we gonna go for next?
Yep.
And we start working on that, and we start talking to the company at the same time we start working on it. Because we're not gonna be able to solve it ourselves, but we also don't necessarily need to wait 100% until people get totally signed up on the storage. Because there's some of them that we currently have in-house that we currently use Cinder for.
These are the ones.
There you go. So we have those here.
Not coincidence that I wrote these names here, right? I mean, these are the ones for which we have been using.
Those are the ones that we hear because they're our customers, which happen to be enterprise storage customers.
Yeah.
If we think more broadly about who's using OpenStack and what storage platforms they're using, we get it. It's a different segment. You get
No, I'm talking of southbound. No, I'm not talking of northbound.
No, I know. But you get a different set of things.
Yeah.
You get lower end things.
Yeah.
You get a SAP, you get a solid plate, you get
So why were so many drivers written for OpenStack? It was because it was catching hold, right?
Yeah.
Because a vendor had to go and participate in order to be part of the game.
Right.
So I think the way you make this happen for Copperhead is the same exact thing, right?
But there's one subtle difference. OpenStack drivers are done simple. I mean, I put
Not because they're simple.
Yeah.
There's 40 of them.
one guy who is maybe even who can write this driver.
So it's actually very difficult in case.
It is.
Look at how many drivers have been removed from Cinder. You will see. You have to monitor it 24/7.
So companies
Crazy,
have
yeah.
2 drivers now, one
Not
for
easy.
Copperhead, one for Cinder. So that's where my question goes, for commodity drivers, why can't we leverage Cinder and the southbound, right?
So there's a whole southbound SDK.
Southbound SDK is a separate
What I
discussion.
think is important here is that, and the southbound SDK is a broader conversation
Yeah.
than OpenStack. But do you have like architecture pictures of what the stack, like we had all this layer cake thing, like can we agree
Give us slide instead.
architecture, like this
Yeah.
is what,
I'm going to
This
now
is what
jump into
we
the
should
second part, right?
and then we
Which
can
is,
brainstorm how to get that.
okay.
He has come prepared for 3 hours.
For the, so the future ideas, right? For the future idea is what we are, So anyway, the current approach we know, we still have, I mean, again, the same slide I have looked at advantages and issues. The advantage is orchestration, the number 2, right?
We thought it was
Yeah. Now, what we want to do, right, is this. That is, get rid of the 2-layer cake and put it directly, right?
You got rid of Manila too, right? Just want to make sure. The focus got to be Cinder and Manila, not just Cinder.
Yeah. I mean, technically, once we do it for Cinder, we can do it for Manila.
No.
Does anyone actually use Manila? I mean, seriously.
What?
Does anyone actually use Manila?
No, Manila is, right? But, I mean, right now our focus
After driving it, I mean, I've been
Depends on whom you ask.
but I'm never really clear on who's actually using it or who's before.
Nobody, and NetApp has said that just this last release is the first time it's even been simple.
It's still in incubation, right? It hasn't come out of the...
No, and there's
It is available now?
It's a core project.
It doesn't exist anymore. That's gone now.
So technically this can be
That's a very
done.
important question to answer. The product manager, right? You know, it's like, if nobody uses the feature, there's no point in.
I wouldn't waste time
Yeah.
on it,
I mean, I don't know the answer, maybe
So
you're right.
currently our focus is only Cinder, not Manila.
Okay.
But we know for sure that in theory it can be done. Essentially, just as we are emulating Nova in the Cinder southbound. And how do we do it? By talking to Keystone. So here in Copperhead, again, we talk to Keystone. So Keystone is the key to all of OpenStack, right? Once we talk to Keystone, Keystone has a list of services and the list of endpoints, right? So what we need to do is remove Cinder and put Copperhead as the service endpoint, right? Once we do that, then as far as the rest of these services are concerned, they think they are talking to Cinder because their only way of talking to Cinder is go to Keystone, get the endpoint, and send a REST API.
Yeah, then you are shifting the focus to API compatibility.
Yeah. So now we respond to all the APIs.
So one question. What we hear from Randy Bias, who's now part of MC, and he's big in OpenStack for a long time is that this approach could fit under this big tent idea, which is, hey, in addition to OpenStack being the implementation to all these new boxes, you allow other implementations of boxes under this big tent as long as there's some certification process or some other thing that says, yes, this could fulfill the neutron. And so is that true?
No, it could fit under it, but there's still a language bias. So
this one,
I'm not really sure about the language. So when I was sitting in the big tent, right, I think Anand was there too. It's not really the language bias. There is a confusion. So the confusion is, what is that minimum set needed to be, say, it is OpenStack, right? So the keystone is the minimum.
There's that, yeah.
But if you were to go and talk to Nova team and Cinder team, it hasn't percolated to, hey, I can be replaceable, so I need to think about abstracting the interfaces so that there can be a peer service that can replace Cinder, right? That theme hasn't emerged yet.
No.
I don't know if that still is the same or nobody thinks along those lines.
I don't think that's going to happen.
Yeah.
What I think the team wants you to think about
no,
that.
but we don't.
OpenStack is driving. It's not Cinder team. It is OpenStack. OpenStack is driving along those lines. So in the big tent model.
But I think there's one problem with this, the license, the open license issue. Like right now, you're not touching it. So
No, let's ignore the licensing and all that, right? That's just but just look at the technical aspects of.
But I will say
that the community going in the direction where Cinder community thinks, hey, I can be replaced. With the Nova community going, no, absolutely not.
So let me tell you how you did.
We wouldn't have time to do that.
No, but technically, what we have verified is that if we do this, we don't have to touch even one line of code in Keystone, Nova, or any of those things. So all those services don't have to be touched, don't have to be modified.
Right.
Everything works as it is. Horizon works, Nova works. You can run compute. You can do everything.
There is some caveat though. You still need to make. You will still have to make certain changes. It's probably not going to be at the high end of, some level of influence you have to do, not in the keystone, but if you want to do fiber channel, neutron is the only way to go. You will have to go through something.
With CoprHD, you can manage the FC networks directly.
Same thing with the Nova, Nova side, the way it does the handshaking when you create the volumes and all that stuff. There will be some changes you need to make. It's not going to be a major...
Because what we have done is, we have a POC. What we did is, we removed the Cinder endpoint. We inserted CoprHD as the endpoint, right? We implemented the API. So, I'll tell you how we did it. So, we have a two-head approach. So, we had the CoprHD REST API, right? And in addition to that, we implemented one more REST API head, which is kind of Cinder compatible. Right? And
the same thing we did with the Voxel.
Yeah.
We created another endpoint.
Correct.
VMware Voxel. Their VMware's version of all.
Correct. So same thing we did. So now you can either use the traditional CoprHD REST API, or you can use the Cinder REST API. As far as the call, so now underlying drivers remain the same. In fact, most of the architecture remains the same.
Yeah. No, that's not what I mean. I get this very well. There are certain, when you look at the Nova API and say, for example, you want to spin a volume, right? So that spinning a volume, you can pass in some arbitrary information. That arbitrary information basically says, hey, here, when I spin a volume, I want to spin a volume that's the initiator on this node. So you will have to pay attention to all those things, right? So that's one element. If you want some advanced features that exist in CoprHD, and you need some way of passing that information from the Nova API, you'll have to go through the Nova community to influence them. You can't assume that it is going to be a black and white, completely compatible. You don't have to go through the other side to influence the changes. There will be some. I don't know what they are. Right, I can't really
but
say.
Till now,
fair to assume
it's fair to assume there will be some changes. You'll have to work through the community to
architected, but you could just. There'll probably be some dependencies and some weird.
So if you look at the Swift part of it, Swift was forced to divorce their API from implementation by essentially two competing implementations. So there was a Gloucester implementation, there was a set implementation, and basically forced the Swift teams.
There might be an EPS implementation.
With that, yeah.
I know every storage vendor.
So it essentially, we can force Cinder's hand by basically making a good implementation, attracting users, and that will force that conversation to happen.
And with this, the other advantage is that because now we are at a REST API layer, we not only are, basically part of the services here, we also have now full access to Keystone. In the previous approach, because we are driver and we are out of the box, we had no access to Keystone, right? Whereas in this model, because we are part of the stack, we have full access to Keystone. The other important thing that with this we are able to do is, let's say OpenStack has tenants, right? And it has projects, and it has, availability zones and things of that sort. I can now go to Keystone and import all those tenants into CoprHD. So now what happens is, in the past I talked about the config file. I have to create so many backend entries for every combination of projects. With this approach, you don't need to do that. In fact, in this approach, there is no conf file. The cinder.conf file, backend, and volume type, all that stuff is gone.
You just create a virtual pool.
I mean, there are volume types. You still have to export volume types, but those volume types are exported through the API rather than through the CLI, right? And backend is a Cinder-only concept, so that is gone because that's not at the API level. When you create volumes in Horizon under a particular tenant, you come to CoprHD UI, you will see those volumes under the same tenant. Then in CoprHD, we have a lot of those advantages in terms of certain volume types are available to only certain tenants. That kind of management you could do. So the 1:1 tenant mapping, eliminating extra Cinder layer, simplified management. Yeah.
So what inside the black CoprHD box? This CoprHD as it exists today, or you're putting in some features?
This is that picture. So the only additional thing, so this is our entire design, right? What we have done is a thin layer here in the API service, which processes the REST API. Most of the APIs are kind of similar, right? You have create volume, you have create volume, you have create snapshot, you have create snapshot. Only the payload is a little bit different. So what you need here is a slight converter layer kind of to convert from this payload to our normal payload, and then the rest of it, remains the same.
Yeah, this is a great picture because this is really the only way to achieve it. I mean, something like this is the only way, because every computer environment will come with their own bespoke
API
the whole
layer,
Docker lib storage thing is emerging with like a different API. I mean, again, functions are almost the same, but it's a different community. They don't want anything to do with the other community, and they make up their own.
Then do you support
What
Cinder?
What about the driver dependencies and all that stuff?
So the drivers are part of controller service, right? So once you write a driver, you can use it both on the left side as well as right side. I mean, we have vplex driver, vmax driver, all those drivers can be used irrespective of whether API is coming this way or that way.
No, I'm talking about
like a set driver or something.
basically to be controlled through Cinder driver, right?
Yeah. So
how do we do that?
for southbound, we still need southbound SDK. I think that is not rolled out. This is purely a northbound change, right? In the sense, northbound earlier we were going as a driver, right? And when we were going as a driver, we are kind of, second-class citizen in this whole picture, right? Now we are first-class citizen in the whole this thing. Does it solve the problem of drivers? It doesn't. So this does not solve your.
That's the afternoon.
Yeah, that's the afternoon discussion.
Oh, you've taken one layer out.
Yeah, but it's still required. Southbound SDK is required, but.
So it's still controller over controller, still his discussion stuff.
Yeah.
So, Neil, what about notifications? You need a notification service for this. And that may be true for other environments too, if we try to expand containers or robots or whatever, you need to be able to provide specific notifications in each of those environments.
Notifications we can do. We can do.
I'm just saying, it's not just the
because,
API, it's also...
Yeah, because see, once we have access to Keystone, apart from these, we'll have access to Ceilometer, we'll have access to all the services.
No, his point is,
generate.
So all the events are certain events that Ceilometer really cares, you need to drop it onto the bus. Message queue bus.
There is no message queue bus across services. Message queue buses are only intra-services. All other accesses only go through the REST API.
The kilometer stuff.
There are beyond the notifications, some of them are in the API, some of them are.
They are buried all over the place.
So those are in the API for the receiving that.
So does that mean we need another?
Maybe we need one more head for kilometer.
Yeah, it's just not the REST API, it's a notification or some.
Could be, yeah.
You could just call that as another.
So then, whenever we,
it just drops it onto the thing, whoever cares for it, right? So lots of things happen on the Cinder volume side too. They just get dropped. Nobody pays attention to it, but there is no guarantee that nobody will pay attention in future.
do we know, do we already know what else we're gonna need to integrate with once we go with this solution? I'm thinking.
We have to integrate with Keystone.
Right.
Right? Query Keystone, get all the list of tenants and import them into CoprHD.
I'm not a big fan of, as I mentioned in the past few times, I'm not really a big fan of importing anything from Keystone, rather touch upon the Keystone REST API to fill in whatever is needed at any given point.
Yeah, through the REST API. Through the REST API.
If you were running it in this mode, again, maybe only, if it's only OpenStack, maybe something where instead of having a built-in list of tenants and projects, actually use Keystone.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. True.
Rather
so,
than importing and making copies.
Yeah, by importing,
it's a nice way to keep the integrity and all that.
By import, I do not mean I create a full copy including credentials or user list and all that. But essentially with this, what we are able to do is we are able to recognize the tenancy on the OpenStack side. Right?
All the authentication and authorization
will happen through
Keystone.
Keystone.
Just go through the Keystone,
Yeah.
just like Active Directory.
Oh, absolutely.
You know, very similar source of truth.
Yeah. So user authentication does go through Keystone, and
so like today in the CoprHD REST API, there's a create project.
Right. Yeah.
We wouldn't need it
on
this
the
was exclusively done through OpenStack.
Correct. We wouldn't need
wouldn't
that.
want that. You create projects through Keystone or
And you're
whatever,
Yeah.
and you could then reference them here, but you don't actually have to create a separate.
How far along are the data models? Repository information that you need to use right now?
Yeah.
The tenant.
Yeah, we do. Can.
That might be better than maintaining.
Yeah,
That's what we are saying.
No,
No,
so
I mean, including for administrators and whatnot, that aren't necessarily managing OpenStack, but managing the VMware environment, rather than having two separate sets of.
So you're saying just
credentials.
this point is for the tenant?
Like CoprHD, even
the Keystone,
no. See the way it works is we have ability to use Active Directory. We have ability to use LDAP. Now we are adding ability to use Keystone. So it's up to the customer, right?
No.
Or who is installing? Who is installing?
No. Those are different things, right? Because today in CoprHD, I can create a tenant, and then I can have projects within that tenant. So this, in Keystone, like these three terms, this is kind of a domain, and these are projects. And what the AD support we have is, hey, this thing, I will authenticate users from Active Directory or from LDAP. And if we just say Keystone, then I still have to create this tenant in CoprHD. No, we don't need. If it is Keystone, we don't need to. If it is, I'm basically replacing this entire thing. It's not
replacing it, but we are keeping that support too and this too. So it's up to the guy who wants to configure. If he uses LDAP as his authentication, he needs to create tenants in CoprHD. If he's using Keystone as the authentication, he doesn't need to create tenants in.
So the point is, it is on-stack, non-OpenStack deployment. Saying instead of having just CoprHD tenant and project implementation, you might as well revert to the Keystone for all.
You can. Even in a non-OpenStack environment, it's up to you. I'm not going to remove the code that we have.
Deployable.
It is.
Nothing else. Or is it regular?
Fairly,
You can deploy it standalone.
Because then that says in the CoprHD architecture, always there'll be a Keystone.
You need not. See, because we already.
That's what we are trying.
Yeah, that's what we are trying to say. It's a choice, so we are trying to is now a good time for a little break?
Yeah.
Okay, because
Getting into the meeting.
that's why I got the forward. That's why I think it's a good time. So that those of you who really want to get into this one, go for
Need
it.
some caffeine?
Those others can, I don't know, it's either we have it now or we just keep going.
Are you telling me that you are getting bored?
Let's take 5 minutes.
My fault.
5 minutes. Restroom.
Whatever. So to get, if you want to get to the restrooms and don't want to get out, there's a way that you just do a big U-turn and you don't have to go to the door. Follow me.
3 o'clock, that's all about.
We just delegate that.
You'll take, you going out?
Yeah,
Go around. Follow, I've done lots of U-turns driving around here.
You can take a lot and leave it.
It's not your fault. I'm curious. What's your,
Except the last part.
You could say. We're gonna try native. The problem is Keystone's not HA, right? So it doesn't follow the same, like Keystone brings along more people. We don't wanna introduce more people. Right? So we need a back end that would write to the cluster. Yeah, there'd be some effort. Scale out, like everything is. Some services and implement the same
We really need to change our code, or if I don't add any of these, I don't remain.
now you have to worry about.
Why do we care? This is not really intellectual property.
But that makes sense.
Inside of
Eventually,
CoprHD could
have
have its own, like when we make driver control as commercial products, we're bundling their own private keys. That way, if it's a non-OpenStack thing, it comes with Keystone, just like it comes with this, and it's great. If it's going into an OpenStack, and you want to leverage the shared Keystone, we turn off the built-in Keystone and just point it at the shared.
And Keystone has federation support.
Or existing customers who already have existing customers.
It's like we're replacing the implementation, the built-in.
By the way, the other
Now we import all of these things.
We would like some upgrade scripts.
It's a
The only thing that would be difficult is instead of homegrown things.
By the way, some of the models.
We're working on that. That
No,
could be
yeah.
a good,
Yeah.
you know.
We're having V3. It's a good V3. Oh,
The V3 one, V2, these were collapsed. And now it's in
And V3 will do federation too, so you have to table you use federation. There's not a Keystone or
That's true. And I think that's
Because
exactly
it's
what
part of
we
CAP,
want.
we already went through
That's the value there.
or made it count some bugs,
To take,
fix things.
you know, not object and, you know, and well.
But that becomes its own little project.
But object and.
You're right, that's not.
That's right. Replace both, we should not just, not just one, it's gotta be split too. That way I have those colors. I was gonna ask about that.
But we would have to do the work.
That's what I wanted, replace both.
Yeah.
Storage drive. That's what we did.
And I don't know if
And I have
I don't know how easy, I mean, sometimes
it means that from my perspective, so I'm abstracting, you know, from my perspective, no different. It means that, the terminology is different, but you're allowing for deployment of,
Including the migration.
Right now, you are configuring for your managing the fiber switching, all that stuff, right?
Copied in.
Specifically with the point, you look, for example, for the VBAC, right? The VBAC administrators, they want to configure the radio, they want to when you point at the IS provider, we start out what they configure. And we know what people are going to say. So it's not even discovered, okay, doing inventory or what we
Okay, I get it.
because they actually point us there. It's not like this whole network we try to find out what you are.
Makes sense.
We allow them to enter the SMIS provider and manage marketing. And then we do inventory intersection inside of this array to find out what they have.
So same capability with others.
Okay, so but keep in mind, so
I think
so Swift has to know about this array. It's not us. It's the problem.
Right, what you should be able to.
What he's asking, he wants us to abstract all that. He wants to control the infrastructure based on policy rather than saying, that's a Swift array, I need to put these types of objects for this. Oh, that is, this array with these capabilities, so I need to put my...
No, but my point is different.
No, it's
S3 Swift and so on. There's no control path separate from data.
I problem.
No, it's not about that.
I was gonna say, like.
What?
They have management.
Of what? In S3, what management is? What management API are you Swift?
But S3 is just a class of storage.
Right.
I mean, adding arrays to Swift, that's the management operation.
Basically. Do the Swift, yeah, the Swift for the Swift API.
Okay, so. Yes, but it's not common end user operation.
Right, but I think what he's saying is we need to go through the storage interface, say, I want reason dedicated to objects, these people go like, well, why are you, you may be pretty dumb. No, everybody behind it, but still you're going through one interface.
So,
what you setting should all be there? Okay. Or, I mean, a lot of them existed on the wiki side, they had the privileges.
My files are getting, my files are 8, and I just...
Yeah, you should have tried, for the ones that are created, push a button, set a password, kind of email, send out.
To make it easier, or the very old, move it into a...
Yeah.
And do some kind of, so where...
Yeah, I got a better job on the,
knowing how to sync
I've done it, but
with every single array.
trying to get back to speed.
But you use policy-based placement and once management.
I used to write C a lot, and then I started the OpenStack stuff about a year ago. I did work on this project too, started writing Java.
Yeah, exactly that. We can.
I was writing C# for a little while.
We did that right now.
Yeah.
I'm thinking
around the 4 of you guys, 3 out of the 4.
What is the performance?
And then Bill was the
Masters in software engineering.
No,
everything was C#.
Yesterday was different.
I know.
Say hi, Bill.
They call it distributed software. Web services pick it up, so they're swinging. They go load sharp, and I was like, why don't you use REST?
Ready out of your name.
REST and JSON option.
When I look at that, no one yells at me. No one.
We are right now using,
That's right, I should have said, yeah. There's no Python REST. Request library.
Yeah, or whoever chose it.
So far.
Yeah, it's like right now.
on object, we have a file that we move.
Are you gonna be working on it at all, or you just have controls in here?
because it's really was the security.
You can't say,
It's good to have your,
Yeah.
2 minutes.
I don't know, it's Cinder is using.
Keep going. Start wrapping up. Much love. You know how it is. Hey, remember,
You're right.
Remember, forever. Yeah, we got a thing yesterday, yeah.
Put a diagram on the wiki.
It's not the.
Yeah, gives us something to know how to make them, like on two property, end up being those couple horns. That'd be bad, that'd be bad.
And visibility into
So, tonight?
to the whole. To me, that's.
I know, they want to go to
That would be something that's, for example, in my, I want to, this is a question, I don't want to get it.
trying to,
On print, right?
people interested in.
He's on vacation right now, so he doesn't need
Unless you get their customers telling them something, like you have to get an IBM customer saying, hey, I want to use CoprHD, why isn't it a driver? And then they'll go supply resources, but just seeing that it's better, to bring it on board, I don't think.
Oh, really?
Travel a lot. Viewpoint, like an IBM viewpoint, they might have different testing methodologies, so yeah, you might.
I've been playing
a lot of time now.
Okay, get this going.
My manager.
You don't have to go home, but you can stay here, come on. Actually, Shish, can you tell Yeah, dual API, that's a lot less, that I can see much better. Dual API, much fine.
That's my turn.
How many pictures you want to run?
I just wanted to do a quickie introduction of a couple of guys that came in today that weren't here yesterday.
Yeah.
So that when they jump in, you have you know who they are. Shrish and Anand, can you give a quick hello and name and what you do?
Yeah, hi everyone. Some of you know me. I'm one of the product managers for the commercial version of CoprHD, WebEx. And I used to work for Puneet. Puneet has started taking me there now, so I report to today.
Thank you. Welcome.
So my name is Srisha. Again, focused more on the commercial version of Plate because a lot of customers getting them up and running and doing the run and focus on working with you all. But now, I think that side of the house maybe is but I work with Puneet as well. And my role is basically on the controller for this.
They were gracious enough to let us have their seats yesterday when we realized that we were in a compressed space. I kind of sent a panic message. If you don't absolutely have to be here, please don't come. So thanks, guys. Yesterday was way worse. Yes. Yesterday was bad. Today it's okay. We're hoping tomorrow is going to finally be the promised land that we had. And then these guys will be there for like 2 hours and go. But they'll know what they missed. And then keep going.
Yeah. Okay. So we talked about this dual head, and in the dual head, basically, it's a small incremental effort on the CoprHD side to add support for Cinder API. And so the other important thing is that once we do this, the replacement happens at a keystone level, right? and once a replacement happened at keystone level, as far as I know, we do not need to make any changes to any of the other services in OpenStack. So essentially, seamlessly they can start using this as a implementation of the block storage API. You get all the benefits of orchestration in the driver model as we talked about, but also the advantage that because of this 1:1 mapping between tenants project, in OpenStack if every tenant creates a volume, CoprHD also the same tenant, you can see. So you could use the CoprHD UI to do all your discovery, add arrays, add switches, add authentication providers, add policies and all that stuff, create vPools, create virtual arrays and so on, and directly start using them through OpenStack.
So how does it work with volume? Like today it's this weird thing, you go into CoprHD, create a virtual pool, then you got to go edit some config file, type it. So is there an API in the Cinder REST API that says show me all the volume?
Yeah. So in fact, the way it works is you go to CoprHD, you create a volume type, and within, you create a vPool.
Right.
You come to Horizon, within a few seconds, the same volume type will appear. You don't need to do anything.
So what information about, is there any information about the volume type that gets published through this volume type, or it's
just a name?
A name.
It's just a name. Now but extra specs, there is name, there are some extra specs, but I mean this is something that we can discuss.
We use extra specs to publish. Like, what is the purpose of an extra spec? To give more information, or these are parameters?
These are kind of parameters.
It's a very loosely handled, one of the drivers. It's a name value pairs.
Yeah.
So in the case of microcontroller, sorry. In the case of CoprHD, there'd be no extra specs because there are no.
Yeah, but there is a QoS. There is a quality of service mechanism. Through quality of service mechanism, what we can do is we can publish every vPool in CoprHD has specs. For example, min path, max path, drive type, thin provisioning. Does it have replication? Number of snapshots, bunch of stuff. So now QoS is a very opaque kind of a mechanism. By that mechanism, what we can do is all of your details about a vPool available in Horizon to the UI to understand, oh, this is gold, this is platinum. Oh, by the way, what does gold mean? 2 paths, thin provisioning, 10 snapshot. What does platinum mean? So we are able to, this is not something that we are publishing.
Accepting parameters. Creative volume.
Yeah, but during create volume, even today, even in CoprHD, we don't accept any parameters to say create me a volume of so and so spec, right? The end user or some app, outside is supposed to do all that, and finally at the REST API level, give us a vPool saying create volume of so and so size and so vPool. So that translation has to happen somewhere else, right? In the sense that a user already knows what volume types he or she is, eligible to create.
The reason it's there is because if the driver wants to use those parameters to call its own array API differently, the operator can actually configure those accordingly.
Right, but that's a little bit of a hack because they didn't have a policy system. But we don't have, so we would use
that
just to publish the capability.
Yeah.
Right, so we have sort of a volume type, sort of one-to-one.
Yeah.
And then we would use extra specs.
Not extra specs, QoS.
Is it a separate thing?
Yeah.
QoS actually has to be associated with the volume type.
Yeah, we'll use QoS to give more details of the vPool to the end user.
Right. Now, today, this is where I think the presentation that, let's say, Vlad will do tomorrow. Today, when you go to create a virtual pool, you say bin provisions, the drive type, and do some prototype where you give latency, response time, throughput, whatever, like some SLO style, not like.
So it's mapping.
Not specifying how, but what you'll get.
Okay.
And then they have all kinds of cool things to automatically configure the right stuff to meet random. To meet those things.
Now you're stealing it.
Now we're gonna hack it. So allow it to get better QoS. Things.
So you're saying extra spec map to QoS?
No, not extra spec. QoS maps to, see, volume type, if you see volume type, right?
There are two elements. There is a volume type that has extra specs and there is a QoS.
No, in a
Are you talking about the QoS in the...
Yeah, I'm talking about QoS.
Okay.
In vpool, right? In the vpool structure of CoprHD, you have a lot of information about what that vpool is.
Okay.
It talks about, the kind of services you have, replication, snapshot, the number of paths,
so they will translate into QoS.
They will translate to quality of, not QoS extras, QoS.
Okay, so I'm talking about a Cinder language. So how you're converting into, you have a Cinder API that gives me.
Yeah, but you think of the OpenStack user, he's using Horizon, right? If you go to, he's not going to use CoprHD UI. Probably,
That's
right?
exactly, yeah.
I mean, he can, but we have to make it easy so that in his existing environments, everything works, right? You go to Horizon, you see all these volume types, right? And you want to know what is this volume type all about.
Right.
The name Gold Platinum doesn't tell me anything.
Right.
You click on Gold, you look at QoS specs, all the things which in the CoprHD UI you can see about a volume type, everything should be visible there. So we want to give that full visibility.
So when I do the get info about volume types, there's some
all these
array,
all these things should have,
that has arbitrary.
Like if you're using SLOs, the SLO name should appear there, right? So that kind of visibility we want to give to the end user, so that when they use a particular volume type, it translates 1:1 into the underlying vpool that your corporate admin has created.
Be in sync with Cinder. Cinder now has some common capabilities like, for example, sync provisioning,
Not Cinder, because I'm talking of Horizon.
No, okay, so let's talk about it.
But I'm talking about like the volume type and extra set. I don't know if you want to try to be sync. There are some common capabilities.
Because I don't know if extra specs are visible at Horizon level.
So the extra specs, we don't want to.
Yeah, we want to do QoS. Yeah, QoS is what we want to use as a mechanism to give more information about a volume type to the end user.
I think what Gene's saying is Cinder is standardizing their QoS specs, right? And do you want your...
Not just...
No,
it's just they have the capabilities, so...
Right.
Like, for example, sync provisioning, everybody calls sync provisioning.
Yeah, that's what I'm
saying.
saying. So
Everybody calls something different.
if someone's using Horizon and they expect to see that from Cinder, right, they're used to seeing it from Cinder, they would think you'd see the same.
I don't know if you want to move some of those, outside of the QoS, you still have your...
Because QoS is a kind of opaque mechanism by which you can give any information you want. So it kind of gives us a lot of freedom in terms of publishing our entire vpool specs, right? And tomorrow as we add more stuff, right? I mean, surely we are going to move and add more stuff. All that stuff can be published.
Okay, just to be clear, there's two things, extra specs and QoS. We're saying QoS, is it QoS spec or QoS?
QoS, just QoS.
There's also QoS specs, so we define QoS.
QoS specs would be used to just publish information about what this site does.
Yeah.
Extra specs in the case of the CoprHD
will not be used. Will not use.
Right. So now the other thing, just on the track, so there's the V-array Cinder has some kind of availability zone.
Yeah, so VRA will be mapped to availability. So, we have VRA concept and OpenStack is availability zone. So we'll map VRA to availability.
Because maybe the Cinder experts in the room. Thought I heard that Cinder has its own availability zone construct, independent of the availability
This is
zone.
the availability zone of NOAA. This is the OpenStack availability zone.
No, but
Cinder.com, there's you can't use it.
why?
But availability zone is an OpenStack wide concept.
There are two.
Yeah.
There are two.
There are two.
Two different.
There's availability, I guess NOVA has an availability zone construct, and then Cinder has its own.
Mostly for the services, bigger services, how you are actually carving out and isolating the access part of it. So there is a service-to-service communication and there is a tenant-to-service communication. So two different constructs.
The availability, Cinder availability zone means what?
Actually, it's just they're not in sync. It's not like it's defining its own.
What is it?
It's not.
If I put,
It doesn't.
what do I put into availability? What do I
Not
put
tracking
into
them.
availability? Like semantically, what does it mean? What is it supposed to be used for?
Not checking match. It's really just like.
Right. That's the mechanic, but like semantically, what is it supposed to represent? Like, why would I make an availability zone? Like, what problem am I solving?
I believe it's part of the create arguments, which availability zone do I want to create design from?
My understanding of availability zone is something similar to a VRA concept in CoprHD. So VRA is a way for you to. It's not Cinder availability.
We're talking about
it's availability.
We are all talking about Cinder availability. What the heck does it do?
I don't know why people say OpenStack is complicated. I get it.
OpenStack and Cinder talking.
In OpenStack there is an
You create a line, there's an optional argument saying, create from this.
And is it like Amazon EBS, where if I want my instance to be able to talk to my volume, I have to make sure that I create them in the same availability zone?
Yeah, exactly. Something like that. Yeah.
It's just, I think there's some issues there. It's not completely in sync, not checking to see if that line is really valid.
I'm wondering if it's a lot, because I know a customer that's basically using like 10 different AZ zones in Nova, but then they're using one Cinder AZ zone to share Cinder across multiple Nova AZ. So I'm wondering if it's a way to share storage across.
You can either share it or you can either partition it the exact same way. It kind of gives you a.
It's letting you make it shared or unshared between Nova AZ.
So it's up to the operator to make sure that he actually correlates them correctly when you configure Nova and Cinder, or share across all of them.
That's it.
Wait for you to shoot yourself in the head.
It's a
It's a way to isolate your Cinder services, and then when you create a volume, I want to create
several mechanisms to do that.
and it essentially creates that availability zone. So your availability zone could have Cinder volumes managing bunch of storage packets, and it will go, the request goes to that portion of it. So you can technically partition your storage backends into bunch of these availability zones and manage them and route the request to specific availability zones.
Something like that.
Yeah, sounds like the VRA.
Yeah, it is.
I agree, but
It's not excessively used, I know it doesn't,
but again, I have some environment, right? And I have some storage junk here, and I have some servers here with compute VMs. Right? Now, there's an availability zone. The example was like, okay, for whatever reason I decided I have availability zone 1, availability zone 2, and availability zone 3.
Then you can have only one key.
And I decided, I just want availability, storage availability zone A.
Exactly. So, because
So now, so then,
OpenStack
is it, when you configure the availability zone in Nova, you tell it which storage availability zone?
Yes.
Like, how do you map how does this picture?
It's up to the operator to figure it out.
Like,
Normally they don't get into that route, they essentially configure exactly the same thing, so you don't have to deal with different availability with it.
These are just like, if you want the
so if I have my create instance, there's some availability zone. And if I have a create volume, there's some availability zone.
Yes.
Is it the names have to match?
Yeah, otherwise it's not going to happen.
Like how does it, like how do you tell the difference between what I meant was this versus what I want is this?
It's all the operator.
No, but how does
But if it's by default, does it do like the one on the right? I mean, if you don't specify?
By default, I think it's the one on the left.
Okay.
You know, unless you slice it up.
You don't slice it.
Okay.
So, but how do they actually, is it in an overconfig that they say?
There's no mapping, that's the problem. There's a correlation problem today. You can specify create an instance, or create that. You can say
They all go
create
to
a
the
volume.
default availability zone. So there is something called a default. You don't have to specify, it always reverts to just the basic default Cinder availability zone, that is whatever is default. So
whenever the
when you
user
get into if you get into very advanced where you create your own availability zone, then when you create a volume, you have to specify the availability zone. Otherwise, it won't go anywhere, or it will revert back to the default. Everything will land up in one place.
Okay, so create volume, you take some arbitrary availability zone string, create instance, you some arbitrary availability zone string. If it's in this case, you basically, you don't have to pass an availability zone. If it's this case, you have to pass an availability zone. And the X here, well no, like, this is availability zone X, Y, and Z. You can call these 1, 2, 3.
And then
You have to say 1 here and X here.
Yep. And then you have cells too, right? Nova has cell concept too.
What is a cell?
Cell is essentially a loosely called virtual data center, maps to virtual data
So
center.
this could be a cell?
So cell allows one API endpoint to have multiple schedulers and filters that are basically navigate.
Okay. So then,
The partitioning of your,
okay, each availability zone is its own open?
no,
Like, is there a no
services.
What do I need?
This is going to be a long conversation.
We need to have a separate discussion on this.
Parking lot. This was clear how we, like, it's a little bit unclear how we.
We can map it, that's not a map. That's,
Fine, parking, and whatever.
yeah, we can just put it in a parking.
Parking lot.
Yeah. So later on, I have a list of community.
Yeah, both Jing and Kurt are part of the Cinder committers team.
Okay.
Is that what you guys are called? No.
Jing is a Cinder core.
Core.
Power.
Okay, so I made a list of some use cases, like what are the issues with the current way we do configuration. There are a lot of manual steps, and network zoning, and admin has limited visibility in name only. So what we will do is we'll give complete visibility to features via virtual pool. And so
the
there are
storage configuration use case, manual steps, what is the middle
these
column?
the current is with if you use the driver.
With the driver.
With the driver, these are all the things you do. Whereas if you put CoprHD directly into the at the API level, these are the advantages you get, right?
No, but I think it's
no,
not a CLI versus UI. It's the level of automation.
Yeah.
Independent of whether it's CLI or UI. So like with CoprHD, you can create your arrays and repools so that as new storage systems are added, they automatically get put into the right repools in this, whereas
so with the driver, what you have to do is you have to edit a file and you have to create those mini entries and all that. So a lot of manual configuration. I mean, at the end of the day, with a lot of hard work, you can still get all the benefits of output, but a lot of manual work is required.
right, so with CoprHD, I mean, it just says it's all possible via UI.
Yeah.
That could mean I got to do the same 50 manual steps. I just do it through a UI, but that's not it. Right, the fact is there's no manual steps.
Yeah.
It's automated.
Automated.
That it comes through UI.
Totally. In terms of features, we have high availability discovery and a lot of all those other benefits of storage configuration.
Oh, this is why CoprHD is better than Cinder. That's what you're talking about. Okay.
Yeah.
I'm totally lost because I thought by going with the previous one with the existing POC, you still have some gaps that need to be worked in the community.
No. So 3 deployment options I thought about, and this is something that we can discuss. The gray is the one where for small deployment, right, where you don't need any scalability, or if you are using commodity storage, you still might use Cinder with its own driver. So you are not going to replace it with CoprHD in each and every scenario.
Okay, so back up a little bit. So deployment options for what?
Deployment options for OpenStack, right?
With the current state or with the future state?
Even with the future state,
okay.
I'm not envisaging each and every OpenStack user using CoprHD as a storage controller, right?
Come on, the open
that's not what you want to.
Yeah.
I mean, the end goal is not that, right?
So that's what I'm saying. The first case, in a simple environment, you will still use the current Cinder with its own driver. Right? You will go to the next stage, the blue one, where you will use Cinder but use CoprHD with its Cinder driver.
No.
It's too complicated. SAL doesn't want that middle state, right? And the last green state is where
I don't know if you can get out of the middle state though. As a migration path, we are not suggesting that got to be the end state, but if you don't have that support, you probably may not start some customer
that's fine, but we shouldn't have like a flow diagram to say when to use.
No.
I mean, the goal is to get rid of that hybrid thing.
Goal is to get to the green.
I think the case where we would say, hey, built-in Cinder, go that way, maybe the LVM.
Yeah, the first case.
If that's all you're doing, you just DAS with LVM.
You're downloading OpenStack, you're trying it out.
Anything with LVM today.
Yeah.
I'm not sure there's a lot of motivation to go do something with LVM. Yeah, so it could be, okay, for dev test with LVM only, when, CoprHD's not going there, but for every other use case.
Okay.
There's another element to think about too, sir, right now. Can we reach that green thing if we're not part of the distro?
Let's separate
That's a
what has to be built
Right.
from how the community is engaged and routes to market and distro. It's all important, but that's not. I mean, let's go figure out technically what needs to be.
How much effort would it require to support LVM?
The LVM, I don't know if even in test and dev, people use LVM. LVM is just a way to prove out something in the early part of the Cinder development because that's what people used to.
Okay.
But it's like, it's for testing, but it's like.
I mean, if you want to be a part of the OpenStack community and block storage, you're going to use LVM because that's what Tempest uses.
So
Actually,
I'm thinking that
That's the only built-in.
the only thing that's pretty much across all the
it's
different
there.
distros.
It's using local storage essentially.
Yeah, you have to treat each server as a storage array.
Yeah,
Right.
that's what it is.
That's the thing.
It's like Scale.io, but instead of scaling, it's only single node. Yeah. I mean, it's a local storage.
Distributing sense of the word.
It's a local storage.
Right.
You're thinking.
I'm thinking if you want to be ingrained in the process and to have more users and have more people touching it, then you probably need to think about adding support.
Okay, we should capture that.
So if we go on to the big tent, then I think you're right.
You want a reference implementation, someone can download CoprHD, blast it up on a VM, and it's working.
Yeah,
Right.
But if we don't do this under the construct of a big tent, then you don't necessarily.
Sure.
Yeah.
Sure.
So I'm saying there is an API and there are 2 implementations. One is in Python, one is in Java. The Python one is what you by default get when you download OpenStack. It uses LVM. For most of the enterprise cases, you will do a replacement, put this API compatible Java one, and that will do all your work.
So you have a LVM capability in CoprHD? No?
Not necessary.
Okay. No, but when you say Python and Java,
He's talking about not being in OpenStack, right?
Even if you're replacing it.
I don't think CoprHD ever becomes part of OpenStack. For this reason.
Yeah.
It's like, it makes no sense. It's like counter to this, which is like the biggest reason why you, so if the only reason we do LVM is so that you could like not replace in the deployment, but the actual OpenStack project is here instead of that, then I don't think that makes sense for companies.
Yeah.
For this reason.
So that's why we
need to figure out, is it necessary for the big tent? If so, then okay, maybe. But if it's not necessary for the big tent, but only if it was to replace it literally, then I think replacing Cinder inside of OpenStack Foundation is not.
So Kurt, in the big tent,
not where CoprHD.
do you see that as a problem if you don't have LVM? So is it mainly meant for just a convenience to do the testing and unit testing, or is it more of a lot more broader than that?
Well, it's in the test flow now, all the test stack and template tests and stuff like that, but if you could, analysis scale I/O, I don't know.
I think writing LVM driver will not be difficult, right? In the sense when you deploy CoprHD, you will already have local disk, right? So you can configure it with an additional disk space when you deploy the VM.
With the complication is Cinder with LVM runs on every node.
That's where it gets tricky.
That's not the CoprHD deployment model. So
correct.
Like CoprHD is just the management plane off a few nodes on the side kind of thing, not running on every node.
That's where it gets very tricky.
That's where like you scale, if you want that, you scale it or some distributed storage system, SAS or something else. So if we needed to do LVM, we have to.
LVM is out of convenience for testing in the OpenStack distro.
But then you will have to include the iSCSI target as part of your distro. So which means that when you're using LVM, you are actually in the data path, and there is an iSCSI target associated with that LVM.
Not in the data path.
It's a sideways thing that has no value other than.
So maybe that's better off being a community project that we get.
Or we just say, if all you're doing is LVM, just go with.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying.
Okay.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying.
And for those environments, nobody for real.
Yeah, why bother doing all that?
Why bother doing all that? Yeah.
I agree.
So technically, it's possible.
We have CoprHD plus Scale I/O simplified.
Yeah, well, frictionless.
But the blue one, the middle one, whether we really need it or not.
You a jet fan?
I don't know, but I know what that means.
The middle one, the blue one, do we really need it or not, is something to be debated.
Well, I don't think we can get away with it. You need it. It's a question of
if people are using that now.
No, but here's the problem. Once we have the screen, there's no reason anybody should ever use blue. Right. So we wouldn't want like, this is like these sales things. Okay, if your customer is asking for this, we'll sell them that product. Like we would never want that, where somebody would not choose green for some other reason.
What we're saying is for the next 6 months or 1 year, we'll be in
no green.
There is no green, exactly.
So once we have a green, blue.
Once we have green, when I say green, it does not mean just the code itself is CoprHD has all the plumbing. It's also the drivers. At least 80% of the drivers need to be there. Who cares about the rest of the 20%?
Okay, so the only reason
nobody
uses blue is because CoprHD doesn't have.
You're right. So that's why I said southbound SDK is critical.
Like either it has a driver or it doesn't. Right. If it doesn't have a driver, you could do blue.
So southbound SDK is critical. That's what I've written here. For your deployment to succeed, right? And vast majority of your customers to go to the green, you do need a strategy to have,
I get that, but I'm saying the purpose of this slide looks like.
I have three.
If you're doing this, but like these things should just be if CoprHD doesn't have the driver. Then you go do something else.
Okay.
But for LVM, CoprHD doesn't have a driver. Everything else.
Okay.
And hopefully the driver coverage comes.
Sure. Okay. Now, the phased approach, this is what we want to do. In phase 1, we did the Cinder driver. In phase 2, this is what we want to do. We want to implement the API compatibility. We also want to add support for object platforms. I mean, that is the other discussion we have, right? That for API, we can do whatever I did for block, same thing can be done for file. For object, we need to add support for object platform. Right? And then in phase 3, and this is something maybe a year or two from now, we can then add more support in the base OpenStack itself, because some of the features of CoprHD, even with API replacement, are not consumed by the upper layers like Nova and all. So we do need to contribute features. We also need to add CoprHD as part of the distros, as Anand was saying. And some of the advanced features which we have in the UI, we can add to the Horizon UI through some extensions.
So I think that's a Horizon UI. I'm not sure if it is an investment. Horizon is evolving as, hey, here are the REST APIs, here is how you can click down from the UI perspective. It's not really evolving as the portal for operators. So we just need to be careful on how much of investment we want to do in Horizon.
OpenStack Summit, most OpenStack admins are preparing CLIs and APIs to orchestrate things. UI.
So our UI focus got to be the CoprHD UI. It has to be the catalog, and focus got to be more and more catalog. Simplifying the actual provisioning part for the volumes and files.
Okay.
Yeah,
right.
I would agree with that. Invest in APIs, and then secondly, there's been distributions that have maintained their own custom horizons before, and our cost of maintaining is not worth the end user benefit, basically.
Yeah, and then all these guys, right, HP, Helion, distro, for example, they're writing their own stuff.
Yeah.
I mean, Meratis guys, they want to do their own thing. Everyone is marching towards writing their own thing. So our job has to be REST APIs, and here is the storage management portal.
Do you guys see with your current Viper controller that people are using the UI more so than the CLI or REST interfaces, or are they scripting it all up?
Yes, I think
You
we have a mix, but I think we have more and more customers using UIs.
Start with UI, and if you get very familiar, then you get into this.
Right.
Most of the storage admins don't know REST API very well.
The moment you get into the REST API for that, that's for storage admin, they think that, okay, I need to have an additional thing. They consider this as a scripting because their environment has either they script and do what they want to do today, or if I need to use REST API, they will consider or perceive it as a scripting. So that's why they want, something that's available, like click, click, click.
Yeah.
I have trouble with the second one, because I think we're missing. So, I think, we have this, enablement, you can kind of do it, it's this wacky thing.
Yeah.
Like phase 2 means we get
Phase 2 is what we are into now.
No, but that's, I don't know if I would characterize that as differentiation, right? That's just like, make it a drop-in replacement.
Replacement, yeah.
Right, part of which is the API stuff.
Yeah.
But before going into objects, there's like other things that just, like, the deployment stuff we talked about yesterday, like does it work on Ubuntu? Like there's some, I think, many more fundamental things that still have to be done beyond adding doing the keystone thing and adding and maybe we should enumerate, like, for this, for real, to be like a real drop-in replacement, what else? I think there are other things.
I think he's purely focusing on the OpenStack integration.
Yeah,
he's
I'm
looking
not.
at, hey,
I'm not.
those
are all the things that we need to.
I assume the development piece is already covered. If the distros are there and the developer-friendly tools and all the processes around me, and what do I need to do on the OpenStack integration to get out of this mess of dual versus just one, right?
No, bare metal install and all those things we still need to do.
Yeah,
I'm not denying that.
But if we think about, again, if we put like, if this was an actual problem, like, okay, we're going to go after some market, right? What are the 5 things that must be true for somebody who's in that market to say, okay, this will be good? Like, one of them is like, okay, we need the dual head because I don't want this complicated layer cake, and that's one thing that has to be like. What are the? I think there are other things that would go on that list. 3 or 4 things. So. And that should be the focus of the phase 2, which is let's get that right. So CoprHD, it's all multi-compute, that's all great, but it has to also be really good for OpenStack, because phase 2, what we don't want to have is, hey, it's a multi-compute thing, but it's not as good in OpenStack as if it did something else.
So can we make that list?
Yes, right, exactly.
And I will write it down.
If you look at the vendors today who make OpenStack distribution, who's the most natural ally that we could work with to roll it?
And maybe maybe Miranda.
Okay, all right,
Those two have approached this,
good, okay.
at least as an EMC thing, and
Sure.
talking to them with CoprHD and what.
Yeah, okay.
So one is your platforms, right?
Right, but we need to get it to the point that it's
Correct.
not other, it's like, these are the two.
Distro support, OpenStack compatible distro support or something, you just put it in.
Correct. What are the other things yesterday?
Like, I'm thinking, like, Olaf yesterday was going over all this Nginx and this, that, making because those things become problematic. Like, the CoprHD stuff is running on the same nodes that are running the OpenStack thing.
Right.
Like, there ends up being conflict between this and this and that, like, if you
were to do all-in-one, so as part of the distro, one is we are talking about the support on, let's say, OpenStack being the predominant development platform, right?
Correct.
And then now you're talking about
we can put Rail as
wants to do
well.
all-in-one deployment. That's where the service, the collision between the software revs and, all the different types of load balancers and,
Oh, you mean the
I mean, maybe there needs to be some modes where you don't run
software download is what you wanted, right?
No, it's just mixing and matching the OpenStack services with CoprHD and deploying everything in one or maybe in a little bit of couple of regions, and they should be able to work without getting into too much of a parity problem.
No, I'm thinking you will still deploy this as a separate software, right?
No, it's sharing the same node.
Physically, it is on the same virtual machine,
Right.
a pair of virtual machines,
There's a
bare
whole
metal.
bunch of functions like Olaf was talking yesterday, like sysservice about controlled reboots. I mean, all that makes sense to do in CoprHD, and the only thing running on that node is
CoprHD, yeah.
So the CoprHD is one of N things. You don't want sysservice coordinating reboots because it has no idea of all the other stuff that's running on it, right? So I think that there may end up being a bunch of stuff where there's almost too much functionality.
Correct.
In CoprHD, and you want to actually have deployment options where you do less.
OpenStack
make it fit better.
True.
Into the
Okay. So physically sharing the same node is what
You can just capture that as a deployment configurations.
So I think phase 2 is about
support for
pluggability, usability.
Yeah, I mean, phase 2 is
all
all about
differentiation or value add.
No, the phase 2 is all about you have three things, right? One is the CoprHD code supports OpenStack APIs, completely compatible for all the OpenStack services.
Right.
The second thing is we have the drivers that moved away from Cinder native to CoprHD native. And the third thing is it works as part of the OpenStack distro configuration.
Sure. Yeah.
Whether it is Ubuntu or one VM.
Right, those are the three mechanics, but like the tagline is not differentiation value add. It's either it's like you get what you thought you were getting with number one, but it's actually really easy to do like just work.
But this time it really works, honestly.
Like
Rev 2, ease of use and integration.
I've done that before.
Yeah.
I was trying to sell it to marketing guys, but it didn't. I was trying to sell it to you.
Okay. So yeah, that's right. Let's leave object for the time being.
Yeah,
I don't
object is an entirely separate thing.
Yeah,
because like the management of Swift in OpenStack, there's no management of Swift. Like that's done completely external.
Yeah. It is a it's an outside product.
So.
And even Horizon UI, you're saying is not a this thing, right?
Yeah,
I don't know though. I was just kind of confused. I think that the management of Swift is not management. Sorry, I got into trouble with this earlier. I do think object is very important.
Totally agree.
I just think of it as not so much management of the array, but kind of giving us a foundation to do some moving of some workloads, some visibility. In other words, I need to understand. I guess at the high level, I just need it to be a different class of storage that has some different characteristics. And I don't, so it makes sense in my mind to replace both of those drivers. Like Cinder, Swift, both. Because to me, there's no difference, it's just storage.
So I agree, but it's not clear what you would want. Like with the Cinder and Manila, it's pretty easy because there's some orchestration and you just replace those functions in a bit. least in the context of OpenStack, there's nothing that it does today. So that could be extra things, like it's even better because it does.
That's the value add.
Yeah.
But that would almost be a phase 3, which is like, hey, now we're actually going beyond, at least from an OpenStack point of view.
No,
That would fall into the bucket of, hey, there's stuff that OpenStack just doesn't consider and, managing objects in a consistent way. Which I agree has a big value add outside of OpenStack.
I don't know if you're, okay, so I kind of see three different things with this. One is, you have an object store backend, whether it is ECS or Swift or Ceph, whatever it is, right? You need to be able to ingest object store backend functionality. What would that be? Just bringing the cluster online very quickly and then getting the metrics back into it to figure out whether the health of the object store backend is there or not. You may not use the actual provisioning part from block and volume. So that's one element, right? The second element is, certain block and volume type of maintenance operations may actually cross over to the object store backends. For example, I can actually do a backup onto the object store. That's a pretty dominant usage model that we see evolving. So that's the second.
You would want to look at your overall.
I want to see the whole thing, and I want to be able to, so for example, from my point of view, what I want to do is say, CoprHD is basically the foundation, it's basically the storage. What that means is, I have something, let's say it comes in, and it's something that needs to be fast, and it's very important, and over time what I want to do is I want to be able to say, I have a policy that says, after this amount of time, this kind of classification of data, let's move it.
Archive.
I want to be able to move it,
You
right?
want to archive.
Yeah, backup archive here.
Backup and archive.
I want to be able to move it, so I need to be able to see it, I need to kind of understand its performance characteristics a bit, I need to understand its volume, its kind of usage, capacity. I need to be able to manage it.
It's more like SRM for
No, there is some automation, because I want to be able to migrate things around.
Yeah.
It's not provisioning, because there is no provisioning. But it's
not an
other automation use cases.
And it's, self-service portal, if I say...
What load balance you're talking about?
No, lots of people are using this as, hey, it's a backup tier, I can care less about it. I can just take a bunch of VMs that are idle for 6 months and then move it there. Snapshots, for example, I may just use the snapshots as a way to back up stuff, and I want to move it into, it's a classic Amazon use case.
The one which, I think, Tal was there, SAP, and each time I go to SAP, they keep telling Tal's name of this.
That's the biggest thing, because they put their production VM stuff on relatively high performance, high cost storage. And they have a bunch of cross VMs because they just want to, this is a VMware, I don't think it's the same use case.
Yeah, same use case.
But archive.
I want to put it on cheap storage
Yes.
because somebody's using it, and if somebody wants it, we will reinflate it, but like it sits there and does nothing. So can we have some way to archive these things all? And that, like, being able to manage that as a consistent thing,
That's a
loss and
huge
object,
value added.
so I would almost put this as like a, it's not just support for objects, it's like these use cases that span like lock and archiving and other.
To me, that's
essentially the automated tiering or whatever you want to call, right? So
it's enablement of those things, though, right? I mean,
enabling the capacity tier as the wait for the maintenance, data service maintenance or something. But you may want to call that as a separate one for now.
Yeah.
But I think, it's a very important enough for us to, if we have enough resources, we can just spin off that separate activity.
It's bigger than OpenStack, too, to be candid with you. It's just, OpenStack
It's
is just
it
is a general problem.
Not specific to OpenStack.
I want self-service, portal, for university. Well, what those things map to, if that's not OpenStack that they're coming in through, what is it? Manage IQ is kind of what we want them coming in through, or, well, what does that look like then? I want them to be able to pick different, types of storage. I want that to be going to one common backend so that I have...
It's got to be presented in the service catalog in a way that's easy to do.
But it does map into OpenStack here.
So, let's put that as a separate bucket item, and
it
can be some, more of...
So in SwiftStack sells Swift management, what are they actually trying to sell? What are they trying to sell?
It's the management of Swift.
Standing up Swift itself.
Standing up the Swift and monitoring the Swift cluster, routine maintenance operations and all that stuff.
Operational.
Operational as well as initial provisioning.
Okay.
ban.
There is the on-premise and cloud instantiation. So you can just go with the cloud one, it will manage your cluster remotely.
Competition for something like that. That's focused on me running the array.
Sure.
Yeah. Right?
Right. That's only a monitoring for your sleep.
Here, like spanning.
I assume it came from somewhere. Kind of like Cinder does.
Again, that is an independent thing. I mean, it'd be nice if that works for OpenStack, but it's a general.
It's a general.
General.
It's nothing to do with OpenStack, right? Exactly.
Yeah, and managing migration of data.
Correct.
Maybe there's some policy in some people that says, hey, if this thing goes unused so long, it will automatically.
That's the nirvana. That's what.
Automatically get archived or something.
Right. Take advantage of the service level. So yeah, if I understand the different service capabilities, or of the back end pipe or is
he doesn't have bucks anymore.
Yeah, they all got taken. The idea, I guess, there would be that it's just a common. So the tech is going to change underneath. I know that. The user doesn't care about object or block. Maybe we do, but they don't give a dang. The app doesn't care. It's just some kind of service level obligation is trying to be met. And if we have a unified vision of that, one layer that can see that, then it means that we can start writing policies to move that stuff around. I guess that's, to me, that's the goal.
I think the use case is span, block, and also. Okay. I think I'm almost done. This was, as what Sal was saying, long term we want to have a single layer which handles all block file and object. Right? And then, this is again, we want to have a common layer which spans across OpenStack, VMware, bare metal, and all, different platforms. I did identify some of these projects again. Let's see if anything fits the thing. For example,
So these are different set?
yeah, but the driver part again, the blue one.
What was the previous one?
Huh?
No, what was the previous slide and what's the difference between these two? More details or?
Yeah, I think it's kind of the same.
So the phase 1, phase 2, phase 3 translation?
Yeah, I think it's almost the same. Yeah, we can skip it. So I think that's it.
Thinking that all day.
Now we can start. Sort of capture the projects we talked about. One was this Keystone, like CoprHD comes with its own proprietary built-in thing.
Have we made the decision to replace it?
Well, that's the potential project we should sort of do. But
the analysis, so
basically, Chuck, the intern, whatever CoprHD has, adopt Keystone basically. Even for non-OpenStack, Keystone is the same. Keystone, that's one whole.
I don't think that's the best slide.
Yeah.
Heard about what we just talked.
Okay, but let's get the list and then we can. That's one thing. We talked about this LVM support, but then we kind of backed off and saying, probably not. There's obviously the Cinder head, the API head on top of this. There was the Ubuntu support at a minimum. Maybe there's a few other.
And then Sarcosa services, OpenStack and services and CoprHD services coexisting. All of them. None of them breaking each other.
I feel like that's shorthand, I'm assuming, but to me that's more just like usability for the OpenStack community.
Yeah, like an
whatever that
all-in-one
means.
developer community.
It just means that I'm an OpenStack user. It means something, right?
Yeah, you're trying to just capture what those key things would be.
Yeah.
Then we talked about we don't yet have the list of, okay, there's 40 Cinder
drivers that these, do these three.
Yeah, let's get the Cinder drivers and let's prioritize and say, here are the top
Yeah, but
3 or 4, 80-20,
To the top use drivers.
then go after them for 40.
I was open.
What?
You can't put EMC at the top floor.
DMC is already there, right?
Yeah.
So that's on the-
Non-EMC vendors.
So prioritize
Yeah.
drivers and then port them.
And then it would be,
Not
it
for
would
them.
be,
Okay.
But go after
Rewrite them. Yeah.
working with those vendors to aggressively.
and there's almost two angles. One is
Pull them.
what the developers use, and what the people run in production.
Yeah.
Like the developer thing, it would be not some array, but it could be some software. Yeah, maybe LVM, but we wouldn't do that, but Scale staff, you know,
Yes,
those kind
yeah.
of.
Package them with something else.
Sure, and then, so this is from a dev point of view and an ops point of view, if you're running different set.
I think we should constantly watch out for the big tent, criteria that is evolving, not complete, I would say, and make sure on the technical front we are.
So, the only time Big Tent will become applicable is if we plan on falling under OpenStack governance. And I think with the multiple computer environments we established, we don't ever plan on doing that.
I thought Big Tent was projects that were not part of.
Don't have to. Big Tent is bringing projects that weren't historically OpenStack projects to the OpenStack governance model under Stack or OpenStack.
I thought it was like, if it's compliant to these sets of.
Yeah, it doesn't have to be completely part of OpenStack.
That's all it is. If you don't need to run an OpenStack infra, and if you don't need their license, you don't need to use Big Tent. You can just coexist. Big Tent is only if you want to use this umbrella.
Okay, so I'm confused then as to what Big Tent is.
Okay.
I understood.
Yeah, we need to go figure out.
There's Big Tent as a philosophy, and
Right.
there's Big Tent as implementation. Big Tent implementation is only if you want to be under OpenStack management. From a philosophy perspective, Big Tent opens up the door for things like CoprHD to coexist with OpenStack. But you don't have to be under Big Tent to be.
Okay. I would agree with that, yeah.
Where the
If you
search
want to take
fit in.
advantage of OpenStack infra environment, like you're saying, the testing and the review system and all that, then you definitely meet the Big Tent criteria, get involved into it.
So my
But
understanding
you
was
may
not really
not
that.
want that, right?
There is a native project that need to be part of the OpenStack Foundation where you kind of get to take advantage of it. There is a project that's outside the OpenStack. I somehow thought that Big Tent is looking at both of them, but it is laying out the criteria that, hey, if it is OpenStack compatible project, here is what you need to do. You need to be compatible with Keystone. Here are the 5 things you need to do, and then you are compatible with OpenStack.
No, that's
Not really. Big Tent does not really mean it has to be native, and that is the focus.
Yeah, exactly. I think, what that would fall under is the OpenStack powered and OpenStack compatible licensing programs. So
Exactly.
basically, you could run Interop, which is DevCore, RevStack, etc. As long as you meet the requirements from the API perspective, you can qualify for that licensing, which is more OpenStack powered than Big Tent.
So it's the different tiers that you've qualified based on
That's
that.
been defined?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. OpenStack.org/Interop.
Okay.
So we have a list.
Hmm.
Part of the question should be project to participate, and if so, which one?
Right, that's part of the setup for this afternoon.
Okay, we can.
But definitely leave it there too.
Yeah.
I think on number 1 and 2 we made significant progress, and there was 1 and 3. Yeah, I think year 2.
Number 1 we have.
What is
That's
number one?
the Keystone.
Keystone.
Yeah. So number So I mean there was some discussion to put that feature branch into CoprHD.
Number 3.
Number 3, and in fact number 1.
Okay, but let's have Urs right. There's a session at the end of the day.
Correct.
Talk about who's doing what, and
True.
some of these.
We can do that.
Spend some time tomorrow as
Yeah.
well,
Yeah.
kind of,
His style is not there tomorrow, so I think we
Long
want.
Island tomorrow.
Okay, you can
I
do
can't
it.
be in.
Yeah.
You're gonna miss this one.
I will miss it.
Yeah. Okay.
And Neil, in that model right there,
Huh.
to support like the current Cinder backend driver,
Huh.
does that work in this? Does it plug in anywhere, or is that why we need this help? You know what I mean? Like, and that app, does that plug into this model right now?
It will work.
mean, there's nothing.
So it supports the
Because
current Cinder
these
driver.
north and south are completely, independent of each other.
This is like just a pass-through.
Yeah.
Okay.
So, nothing stops you from using the 3-tab through that.
A 3-bar Cinder volume driver.
Yeah,
Plugs
through that.
into the bottom there.
Yep,
And then your REST API just passes it through because it's like, this is not for me.
yep. It will work.
Yeah, that's what I assume it would.
Yep.